Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Board of Education. The board started its meeting this evening at 7 o'clock for closed session for the discussion of three topics: employment of employee, approval of October 12th and October 26th closed session minutes, and actual potential litigation. Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Carlquist.
Here.
Mr. Collins.
Here.
Ms. Conroy.
Here.
Mrs. Davy.
Present.
Mrs. Droney.
Here.
Ms. Hirsch.
Here.
Mrs. Ostajic.
Here. 7 board members present, none are absent. I will mention that you'll notice the empty chair next to me. Dr. Krizik is on her way to the meeting at this time. She was in Washington, D.C. for the recognition of one of our Blue Ribbon School, Edison, so she's on her way back and she'll be joining us shortly. Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first order of business is the public hearing for the adoption of the 2010 Certificate of Levy. I'm going to call that meeting to order and ask Mrs. Walsh to please call the roll.
Mrs. Droney.
Here.
Ms. Hirsch.
Present.
Mrs. Davy.
Present.
Mr. Carlquist.
Here.
Mrs. Ostajic.
Here.
Mr. Collins.
Here.
Ms. Conroy.
Here. 7 board members present, none are absent. Ms. Masterton is going to first give us an overview of the levy. I'll note I have 3 speakers who have signed up to speak. If your comments are related to the levy, following Ms. Masterton's presentation, you'll have the opportunity to speak. Otherwise, if it's related to the general meeting, you can defer your comments till we adjourn and return to the regular meeting. Ms. Masterton.
Thank you, Mrs. Ostajic. Well, last meeting in October, we went over almost all of the information, all the information that's here, but you'll notice that we are now at that red spot right there at 11/16/10 levy hearing. After this levy hearing, and if the board approves our levy, we will be filing our levy. We have to do it before Christmas of 2010. And then in April of 11, the county will notify us of the extension amount that we'll be receiving. At our April board meeting, we'll be presented with that actual extension. Our proposed tax levy for this year is as follows. In the education fund, $70,472,010. Operations and maintenance, $9,285,097. Transportation, $1,395,707. IMRF, $1,552,654. Social Security, $1,036,971. Working cash, small amount of $22,421. Special education, $922,064, for a total without our debt service of $84,686,924. Our debt service will amount to $8,814,067. Our grand total to levy, which is our proposed levy, is $93,500,991. Again, this is an inflated levy. It's inflated about 2% to make sure that we do not lose any dollars that we are entitled to through the tax cap process. You'll also note that our 2010 proposed EAV is $2,497,147,565. I always stumble on that $2 billion. That's actually approximately a 5.8% decrease. And it takes into account about approximately 0.75% of new growth, about $22 million that we're expecting, and it also takes into account the two-page equalization factor, which is a negative 6.8%. And that's the first time in my entire career that I've seen a negative equalization factor. It's a sign of the times. As I said, this is our proposed tax levy, and I'd love to say that this is what we're going to be receiving, but we know better than that. So I would like to show you what we expect to receive in April, what will be our extension. And just to go over again, our proposed levy is 5.69%, and those are the levy dollar increases and debt service dollar increase. The total proposed is $5,338,054. But our estimated extension that we receive in April is considerably less than that. The total without the debt extension, which is, of course, the same, is $83,026,397. Our estimated EAV stays the same, but you'll note that the rate then drops down because we're estimating that we're going to be receiving less than that. The estimated extension includes a regular extension increase of 3.61% as compared to 5.7% that was for our proposed levy increase. Our regular extension dollar increase is about almost $3.7 million. Bond and interest extension, again, is almost $800,000, so our total extension increase that we expect to see from would be $4,459,184. Just to be able to show you the inflated proposed levy that we'll file versus how much we actually think that we'll receive, you'll note the total proposed levy is $93 million, as we talked about, $93.5 million, but we estimate we'll receive about $91,844,664. If we were actually to receive our proposed inflated levy, which we know we will not, our rate would be about $3.75. Our estimated amount would be about $3.68 per $100 of equalized assessed valuation. And I'll be happy to take any questions the board might have.
Thank you, Ms. Masterton. Ms. Hirsch?
One question, Mrs. Masterton. That number, the $91 million number, does not take into account the collection rate. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
That's the levy.
That's the levy.
And then
our collection rate so far, I won't say how it will be this year, but our collection rate so far has run about 98.8%, which is excellent. I do expect that it will be down a little bit, just from what we're hearing from the assessor's office as to those houses that are in foreclosure, et cetera. So I do expect the collection rate will be down, but still not significantly.
Can I ask a clarifying question? What's the DuPage equalization factor? And you indicated it was negative this time for the first time in your knowledge. Can you talk a little bit about the implications of that?
Sure. Taxes are based on the equalized assessed valuation of a property or a group of properties. Each of the townships have an assessor who figure out what they assess the property at any given time. At the end of that, they submit everything to the county, and then the county also looks at the trends and what's going on and assigns an equalization factor. And what it means is they're equalizing the assessment over all of DuPage County. In other words, one assessor might be a little high, one might be a little bit low, and in order to equalize that, they look at all the trends that are going on throughout the county. In this case, the trends are a loss of equalized assessed valuation of the property. And so what they're saying is that in DuPage County, they're seeing about a 7% loss of property value in the assessed valuation. Now, obviously, there are some areas that are more, some areas are less, but equalized over it all, they're expecting about a 7% drop in value. That doesn't necessarily equate to less taxes, however, because taxes are based on the CPI, and in this case, the CPI is at 2.7%. We're allowed to increase by 2.7% plus any new property. So all that happens is our rate goes up a little bit because our value, which is our divisor, has been going down.
Any other board questions? Just I guess a final wrap up. Again, for those that didn't follow at the last meeting when we went through a lot of this information, the reason why we are levying more is because at the time we're doing the levy, we have to do estimates. We don't know all the information. And in order to make sure that we capture, as you said, all of the revenue that's allowed for us, we have to be very conservative in our estimates. Because if we underestimate and the numbers come in differently than we think, that any amount not captured is lost forever. So we lose it from this year's taxes, and then we lose it from the base that we're building from for future years.
That's correct.
At this point, we have 3 individuals who have signed up to speak. I'm not sure if anybody here would like to speak to the levy. If you have, I've got 3 individuals, Julia Wegner, Ken Wegner, or David Kleinhans, or anybody else here who might have come to speak to the levy. Okay, seeing none, I will adjourn and we will return to our regular meeting. And with that, we have some student and staff recognition this evening, and I will turn the microphone over to Dr. Krizik. And we did speak about, so this is a day for celebration, that you were in Washington, D.C. today, also celebrating district success.
Yes, it was a great day to have Edison School receive their Blue Ribbon Award today in Washington, D.C., and it was a very powerful experience for Edison Principal Jim Plascota and 5th grade teacher Nancy Galis. So they were very honored to receive this award, and there were some learnings that occurred in the days before, which made today's ceremony even more powerful. Arnie Duncan was able to speak for a little while and kind of give his perception of the landscape of education. But we're here to celebrate tonight 2 groups of students, and one of the indicators of the rigor of the curriculum we provide for students K through 12, K through 11 in this case tonight, and one of an indicator of the family support to education, and an indicator of each student's pursuit of educational excellence is the number of commended students that we have. That is one of the high distinctions that students can receive, and it really does reflect the board's deliberateness in terms of its persistence and expecting a high-quality curriculum. So tonight we have 5 students that we are recognizing, and I will turn this over to high school principal Diana Smith, and it's the time change. It's catching up with me. So okay, good.
So you guys can come right up here. Face the camera. Good evening, and to the members of the Board of Education, we appreciate the opportunity to introduce you to our commended scholars. And as the board knows, and for the community and the other students and families that are here, each year 1.5 million high school juniors take the qualifying PSAT exam, an exam designed to measure the verbal and mathematical reasoning of our students. And in fact, this year, our current juniors took the test just a few weeks ago. And the students that score in the top 5% nationwide are named commended scholars. And so tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce each of our 5 students to you. And I'll introduce each one, and if you could just step forward or wave. First, let me introduce Megan Bogus. Megan is the daughter of Linda and David. She has 2 sisters, Katie at York and Amy at Bryan, a great student, as they all are. Megan, it's interesting that Megan took on Italian this year after studying Spanish for 4 years. She's also a member of our York High newspaper. She plays lacrosse, and she's active in her church, Grace Bible, where she traveled with her church this summer to a mission trip in Memphis. When I asked about her inspiring teachers and role models, she cites Peter Anderson, her AP U.S. History teacher, as one of her inspiring teachers. And when prompted and sort of asked why he was so inspiring, she said he was somebody who pushed her to be the very best that she could be. A very difficult and challenging class, but made it fun to study U.S. history. but she cites as her true role models her parents, Linda and David. Megan will study journalism at North Carolina, Northwestern, or Brown. That's Megan. I would also mention that her counselor told me that the reason that she wanted to study journalism was that she wanted to make sure that people are informed, and she believes that when people are informed, they will be influenced to positively change the world. So this is Megan. Next is Samantha Dean, and Samantha is the daughter of Barb and Christopher Dean. And Samantha, let's see, your mom is over here, and she's a member of our staff as well. She has an older sister, Beth, and a younger sister, Miranda. She studied in Germany for 2 years, and she described that as interesting, a great experience, but not as academically challenging as she would have liked. So she's enjoyed pursuing an honors and AP track at York. She's a member of our choir and also a member of our bowling team, which she loves. Her AP Spanish teacher, Ms. Byrne, said, Samantha has always excelled in speaking Spanish, but has also been very open to sharing her insight and experiences of travel while discussing our literature. Highly creative and talented, which was evident last year when she even was the featured singer at the Spanish honorary ceremony. Samantha will study linguistics at either Yale, Emory, or her family's alma mater, Cornell. This is Samantha Dean. It's my pleasure to introduce Yavor Enchev. And Yavor is the son of Svetla and Eugene Yanchev. He has an older brother in college. Many of you may recognize him because, well, he's around a lot. I can tell the students, how many of our students here recognize Yavor from at least something. Yavor has sort of an interesting resume. He is a member of our Invite to Teach program. He teaches over at Churchville. His supervising teacher, Danielle Cerrone, describes him as outgoing and caring and respectful of his students and his colleagues. He says he's inspired by Stan Ruddle and Max Schoenberg, a coach and a teacher. In addition to being a National Merit Commended Scholar, Yavor was also named the Fan of the Month last month, if you remember. And those of you that have seen him cheering, I saw him this weekend down at volleyball in a wrestling singlet. And so when he asked me about what he should wear tonight, I said anything but that singlet. You may have also seen his picture in the Chicago Tribune. And I thought it was such a characteristic picture of Yavor because he's a member of the football team, and he was holding his helmet up singing the school fight song for the fans, and I thought it was just a great picture of him as well. He's also one of the student leaders of the Relay for Life, and I would say he is definitely somebody, as our mission statement would say, who's pursuing the joy of a full high school experience. He plans to pursue engineering or teaching, I'm hoping teaching, at the University of Michigan or the University of Illinois. This is Yavor Enchev. And it's my pleasure to introduce Blake Harms. Blake is the son of Carol and Will and is the baby of the family, which I reminded him today. Hard to believe looking at him. Blake has a pretty rigorous schedule this year, taking AP Calculus BC, AP Computer Science, AP Physics C, AP Psychology, and AP English. Is that right? Yeah. And in his spare time, rounding out his schedule with a jewelry class. I was interested to see from the classes that he's been taking, it's interesting that he's always balanced his academics with electives. So I noticed jewelry, other art classes, and woods as well. His teachers and counselor describe him as an intellectual, a deep thinker, an independent thinker, and a gifted mathematician. He plans to study engineering, hasn't chosen a school yet, but he's looking at, I believe, Purdue, Texas A&M, and University of Oklahoma. There you go. So one of the schools studying engineering. This is Blake Harms. And finally, it's my pleasure to introduce Shelby Cost. And Shelby is the daughter of Holly and Kelly Cost and has a sister, Haley, at York, and a little brother, I just met, Spencer, who goes to Bryan. Shelby is, not surprisingly, a straight-A student. She's also the drum major, one of the 3 drum majors of our marching band, and a talented member of our tennis team. It's interesting that tonight one of the things that you're going to be hearing about is the Community Advisory Committee that has been providing guidance to the city and also to the Board of Education on the issues affecting the lighting and the sound at the stadium. And we have 2 students that are members of that committee advocating for students, and that's Yavor and also Shelby, which is interesting that they're both here. One of the nicest things, I had a number of comments from teachers about our students that you see here, but I wanted to read Shelby's because it was her music director, Mr. Pavlik, that said, "It's been a joy to watch Shelby mature as a leader as one of our drum majors in our marching band this fall. Her intelligence, her musical talent, dedicated work ethic, and cooperative spirit have always been clearly evident through her first 3 years in the band program. But we were blown away when Shelby demonstrated that beyond the abilities listed here, she also possessed a remarkable, charismatic energy whenever she was in front of the 130-piece ensemble. Watching Shelby relate to and inspire her peers by infusing her energy, musical talent, and personality has been one of the teaching highlights of my career." And that was from Mr. Pavlik. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Shelby Cost, who will be studying, hopefully studying music at Northwestern University. So, Shelby Cost.
Thank you. And on behalf of the board, I just want to say this is always one of, I think, I'll speak for everybody here at the table, one of the best parts of what we do here. And there's a lot of things that we play a role in, but being able to celebrate our success of our students and having that success be that you are the best of the best. Ms. Smith, thank you very much for sharing a little bit more about these students. It's great to know the depth that all of you carry with you. You're well-rounded students. I think our future is in great shape as we lay it in your hands. And with that, I would like to read a proclamation. Whereas the National Merit Scholarship Program, established in 1955, is recognized throughout America as the most prestigious indicator of academic excellence. And whereas this program encourages excellence by identifying high school students whose performance on the PSAT ranks them among the most academically talented students in the nation. And whereas your community high school students, Megan Bogus, Samantha Dean, Yavor Enchev, Blake Harms, and Shelby Cost, have been named National Merit Commended Students. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education and Administration of Elmhurst Community School District 205 express congratulations to these students on this outstanding academic accomplishment. Please join me in congratulating them.
It's interesting that we follow academic excellence tonight with what I would think of as the pinnacle of athletic excellence in Elmhurst, and that would be the cross-country program that has been under Mr. Newton's leadership for, I believe, 51 years. a little over a week ago, he celebrated with his team's victory of a 27th first place state cross country championship. He's a fabulous storyteller. We could probably be here till midnight with all of his stories. But I'd like to now turn this over to Mr. Joe Newton to introduce to us the first place cross country state champions in cross country. Mr. Newton.
I'm Jim Hedman. I'm Mr. Newton's assistant. He's a little under the weather tonight, so I'm going to take over his duties for him. Going downstate, we brought 21 athletes with us. Some were managers, and we'll start out with them first. Our first manager is Asad Azam. Next is A.J. Weiger. Bill Karstead. James Ray. Max Harold. And Jeremy Hare. The next set of athletes are juniors and sophomores we take down to get the experience of seeing what it's like to be at the state meet. So when it's their turn to come and run, they're not nervous because they've been there and they've done it before. They run a time trial on Friday, and it was one of our fastest time trials in the history of the team. So the guys ran really well. The first guy is Patrick Crowley, sophomore. Next is Evan Fabry, sophomore. Mike Kirby, sophomore. Nathan Miraz, freshman. Henry Benson, junior. Carlos Vega, junior. Chris May, sophomore. And Eric Globke, who won the time trial that day, is a junior. The next 7 are the guys who ran in the state meet. They had a goal from the beginning of the year. If they didn't win the state meet this year, the seniors would have went 4 years without seeing a state title, so they had to do it themselves. So from the beginning of the year, they had a lot of pressure on themselves to do what they thought they needed to do. And they worked hard. They had a goal from the beginning of the year, and that's the exciting thing is you've seen it. They had a goal. They worked towards it. They achieved it, and it was very special. First guy is Scott Milling, sophomore. He was 71st. Next is Alex Memlitz. He was our second runner that day. He was 32nd. Next is senior Matt Simo. He was 50th. Next is senior Tom Hedman. He was 40th. Next is Ron Hedman. He was 33rd. Next is Nick Gornick Sr. was 56th. And the next guy, Coach Newton has coached a lot of great runners over the 51 years. And this next gentleman is probably in the top 2 or 3 that he's ever coached. He ended up second in the state and ran a fantastic race, and that's Jack Driggs. Also, this past weekend, they went down to the regional to qualify for to go to nationals. There's been a national championship for 7 years. There's only one team in the United States, either girls or boys, that is qualified for all 7 national championships, and that's York High School boys right here. The first, at the state meet, we beat Lake Zurich by 2 points. The following week, we went to the qualifier for nationals. They beat Lake Zurich by 276 points. So they're looking forward to going to national championships and hopefully bringing home a national championship to Elmhurst. And last but not least, we could never do any of this without our leader. He's like a father to me. Everybody in Elmhurst knows who he is. He's a legend, and that's Joe Newton.
Thank you. It is the pleasure of the board to be able to recognize the success of this team. When I talk about York cross country, everybody just assumes they're going to win first place every time, that there's something in the water, but that's not really true. The success of this team is based upon the hard work of these students that are up here and what they put forth this season and in prior seasons, and in addition to a strong coaching staff. So it's something we can't take for granted. We are very proud of you and your success. And with that, I would like to read a proclamation. Whereas the members of the York Community High School Boys Cross Country Team are state champions in the Class 3A Boys Cross Country Finals, and whereas senior Jack Driggs earned second place in state with a time of 14 minutes 16 seconds, and whereas the continuing success of the boys cross country program has been achieved through the contributions and support of so many individuals and groups within the Elmhurst community, and marks the 27th state championship title under the leadership of Coach Joe Newton. And whereas the effort, dedication, and attitude developed through the sport of cross country has a lifelong effect on the members of the 2010 team and on other student athletes. And whereas the accomplishments of this team brings pride and prestige to York Community High School, to District 205, and to the community of Elmhurst. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education and Administration of Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205 express deep appreciation and congratulations to Coach Newton, assistant coaches Clyde Ware and Jim Hedman, and the members of the York Varsity Boys Cross Country Team, Jack Driggs, Nick Gornick, Ron Hedman, Tom Hedman, Alex Mimlitz, Scott Milling, Matt Simo, alternates Henry Benson, Pat Crowley, Evan Fabry, Eric Glaubke, Mike Kirby, Chris May, Nate Mraz, Carlos Vega, and managers Assad Azam, Jeremy Heer, Max Harold, Bill Karstead, James Ray, and A.J. Weiger for their outstanding performance during the 2010 season. Please join me in congratulating the students. Thank you. And I will just give a couple-minute pause to the meeting. For all those students and their families who'd like to stay for the rest of the business meeting, we're happy to have you. If you would like to take this opportunity to go home, I'm sure there's homework to be done. That is okay, too. Okay, we are going to continue on with our agenda. The next item we have on our agenda is public comment. I have 3 individuals who are signed up to speak. When I call your name, if you could come up to the microphone, make sure the microphone is turned on, and please start with your name and address and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Our first speaker is Julia Wegner.
Our 3 minutes back to back. So, my name is Julia Wegner. I live at 268 Cottage Hill, and we are here this evening, my husband and I, to express our opinions about this board's recent decision to not renew Dr. Lynn Krizik's contract as District 205 Superintendent of Schools. We are very disappointed with the decision. Quite frankly, we're very confused with the reasons that were given or publicized for this decision. In the newspapers, District 205 Board President Peggy Ostachek was quoted as saying that this board was now looking, quote, for a new set of leadership attributes which will allow us to take the next steps in achieving the district goals. What are these new district goals? And why is Dr. Krizik's leadership incapable of achieving these goals? Peggy Ostachek also stated in the papers that Dr. Krizik worked extraordinarily hard through intelligent leadership and has met the expectations of what the superintendent was hired to do. This is very confusing to us. If Dr. Krizik works extraordinarily hard and has proven intelligent leadership, what exactly are the new goals of this board that hard work and intelligent leadership cannot achieve? Again, this is extremely contradictory and confusing with very vague explanations. On one hand, you admit that progress has been made and goals have been met, yet you are quick to say we need someone new. We would like an explanation for this. Why would you risk an interruption of progress and met goals by not extending Dr. Krizik's contract? It also gives us cause for concern that the most senior members of this board, with the most combined years of experience with superintendents in the past, are the board members who voted and spoke in favor and support of Dr. Krizik. What do these senior board members know that the others do not? It simply does not make much sense. What agenda is being followed here? Is this board interested in continuing to meet goals for the positive progression of our children's education in District 205? What are the reasons for the majority of the board's decisions? Perhaps some mistakes were made under Dr. Krizik's leadership, which incidentally we feel the District 205 board members should share in the responsibility. No one person or situation is perfect or pleases everyone at all times, but we feel met goals and progress made is a recipe for overall success. Our experience with District 205 school system has been with York High School, where we currently have 2 sons enrolled. Overall, we have been extremely pleased with York and the education that our sons are receiving. Is York perfect? No. There are issues and aspects of York that we have disappointed and displeased us. But we choose not to pull our children from York High School because of a few negative aspects or issues.
I'm sorry, Ms. Wegner, your 3 minutes is up. So if your husband would like to speak
Sure.
for 3 minutes, that's fine.
You know, I'd like to defer my time to my wife to continue, please.
We don't have any policy for deferring time, so if you'd like to address the board, you have 3 minutes to address the board.
Okay, thank you. Our overall opinion of York has been positive despite the few concerning issues we have experienced. The school has met our goals for our children's education, and we see progress. So despite a few negative issues with York, we will not give up on the school and enroll our children in a different high school. On the contrary, we feel this board has chosen to give up on overall progress with the District 205 school system despite a few negative issues or mistakes. Overall, our school district is in a good, progressive direction with Dr. Krizik as superintendent. Why risk interrupting this progression in the schools? Why would you risk putting our children's education in jeopardy when you already had an admitted, intelligent leader who met goals and took us all in a positive direction? Why? Perhaps you heard from a few community members who explained about such mistakes or issues. However, you are hearing from us, parents of children in the school system who are overwhelmingly pleased with the progress this district has made over the past several years. Maybe there are more parents like us who did not phone to complain, which should have sent the message that we were pleased and or satisfied with the progress, direction, and general status of our children's educational system. Yet you seem willing to sacrifice met goals and progress made for a few vocal minority comments. That would be a shame. The non-complaints of the silent majority should have been considered here also. This unfortunate decision has taught us that we must no longer remain silent and we must speak up. At this point, the best way we can do that is with our votes in the next elections for this board. It is most disheartening for us as we chose to vote for many of you in the last election. We trusted that you would make sound, safe, positive, progressive decisions regarding our children's education. We will carefully reconsider our votes for board members in the elections to come. Some suggested to us that this board's vote was politically driven. We pray this is not the case. The thought of anyone using our children as political pawns is deplorable. We simply could not accept it. The children's needs should come first. We feel members of this board have gravely ignored the needs of our children with this decision to not renew Dr. Krizik's contract. Our children's educations need progressive directions and intelligent leadership. You admitted that Dr. Krizik had succeeded in these areas, yet now you have chosen to jeopardize this progress in our children's education with an interruption by hiring a new superintendent. You also put our children at risk for the unknown and someone new when you already have a known achiever. We remain disappointed and in disagreement with the majority of this board's decision to not renew Dr. Lynn Krizik's contract during the Board of Education meeting on October 26th. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is David Klein-Hans.
That's closer than I got the first time I heard it, so that's okay. Hi, my name is David Klein-Hans. I live at 260 May Street in Elmhurst, and we have 5 children. 2 have been through the York system, 2 are currently in it, and one's at Sandburg Middle School. And I'm really here for one reason, and that's to thank Dr. Krizik. I want to thank you for the tireless efforts that you've put forward on behalf of our kids, the late night emails. I've been in the town since the mid-'80s and have an opportunity to work with a few superintendents on the building of the new high school, on being a community network provider and bringing in the Y-Ball program into York, on the recent turf project, and now on the lights and PA proposal. And I've never seen somebody devote the late night efforts that I've seen Dr. Krizik devote. I think you've done an excellent job with the infrastructure improvements in our community with some of our key schools. The tough headcount and curriculum changes. I've been a supporter of all of them. And, probably like, Ken and Julie, I'm concerned too. I'm concerned about the loss of momentum. I'm concerned about the loss of leadership DNA we're going to have, and I'm concerned, that the people that voted for this have little experience hiring a superintendent, and the 3 that have were the ones that were ignored. And so I'm hoping we're not getting, a hope-to solution for something I feel pretty good about today. So I'd urge you to maybe reconsider a provisional opportunity, but mostly I'm not here to change people's minds. I'm here to thank you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So we will move on with our agenda. We have Superintendent's Communication. Dr. Krizek, our first item is overview of the new course proposals at York.
Earlier this school year, Dr. Sullivan, and working collaboratively with Assistant Principal Dave Creech and Principal Diana Smith, put together a template for new course proposals at York. This is the first time you're seeing such a structure in the past 4 years, and it is making the course development process one that is, I believe, rigorous, one that attends to a significant number of details, and one that engages everyone throughout the entire district an opportunity to participate in that process, because ultimately, at the end of the day, you as a Board of Education also have to know the direction that we're taking our students in. So tonight, Mr. Creech is going to give you a brief overview of the courses that are being proposed. Tonight you're hearing those proposals, and there's an opportunity for questions. And, pending the outcome of this discussion, we anticipate Dr. Sullivan bringing forth a recommendation at the December board meeting so that we can go forward. Know that this is the first year of the process, and this process will continue to be tweaked and changed over time and moved up. And it will also be used as the same process to introduce new courses to be taught during summer school that are taught by our own staff. So, Mr. Creech.
More? Wonderful. Thank you. I would like to start by thanking the Board of Education for allowing me to come forward this evening with York's course proposals for the 2011-2012 school year. I know that each of you have received a detailed packet on each of the proposed courses, but I'm excited to be here to provide a brief overview of what some of the information that's contained in the packets and hopefully answer any questions that you may have. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the work of our department chairs and our department coordinators. The strength of these proposals is a result of the forethought, hard work, and dedication that their leadership has provided. And also to their dedication to the content in their departments and to the students that take courses in each of the content areas. I would also like to thank Dr. Sullivan for her guidance and support in developing the process and also the course proposal form. She had a large part of that. This year we are asking for the board to consider 9 proposals, and the proposals, each of the courses is listed on the screen. 7 of the proposals are modifications to existing courses, so courses that we already have on the books at York, and 2 of the proposals are for brand new courses. So to start with science, you will see that we are proposing to change or resequence our biology curriculum. And this is an outcome largely of the K-12 science study that was conducted and the recent restructuring of the middle school curriculum. So historically, students have entered high school during the freshman year and have taken either the key ideas in earth science class, earth science, or honors biology. This resequencing would make it so that all students entering would take a freshman biology, have that consistent experience. The special education department, just to skip down one, and I'll circle back to the social studies department, but in an effort to ensure that the special education offerings are consistent with those in the science department, we are asking for consideration to move the self-contained key ideas in biology class also to the freshman year. Currently, that's part of that sophomore sequence. So again, just to really keep that class in line with the others. In social studies, of course, we have an AP government class that we've been offering for several years, and we are proposing 2 changes associated with this class. Historically, the class has been offered as an elective to juniors and to seniors, but there was still an expectation that students take the general government class in order to satisfy the graduation requirement. Well, through this proposal, what we're asking is that the government class, the AP government class, fulfill that graduation requirement, but that it also be allowed, students are allowed to take that during the sophomore year. So essentially, students, our sophomores, would have the choice between taking the AP government course or the regular level government course. Moving down to the Student Support Department, that's the department that currently houses our study seminar courses, but also our ELL, or English Language Learner classes. We're seeking approval of 2 courses in this department. Historically, ELL, U.S. History, and ELL Government, this is in the past, were offered separately. But it was a real problem to ensure that we had enough students to actually run the course. So for a number of years, we've actually combined the enrollment, or combined the class, and we've changed the curriculum a little bit, but essentially that class has fulfilled both the U.S. history requirement and the U.S. government requirement. Through this proposal, we're seeking to split those classes once again and to have a specifically dedicated ELL government class and ELL U.S. history class. The Student Support Department has also teamed up with the Business Department to propose, and this is the first new course that I'd like to introduce you to a Technology and Communication Skills class. This class, like Computer Concepts, is designed to fulfill the computer literacy or proficiency requirement, graduation requirement. And it's designed for students who enter York from less advantaged schools, perhaps an ELL population, or a population of students who simply don't have the necessary skills to be successful in the 1 semester Computer Concepts class. So this would be a class that would be offered as a full year. It would fulfill that requirement, but rather than doing it in 1 semester, it would be achieved through 2 semesters. In the World Languages Department, we're seeking 2. Again, the last one is in partnership with the Student Support Department, but a new course, the second new course, is the etymology course. And essentially this course is designed to provide students with a better understanding of English vocabulary, and that's accomplished through the study of roots and prefixes and suffixes. We anticipate that this would be a course that would help prepare students for the vocabulary and reading sections on the standardized tests, the PSAT, or PSAE, ACT, and SAT. So similar to other courses that are offered in world language, this course would also provide students with a fine arts credit. And finally then, again, World Languages and Student Support have teamed up to propose a Spanish Heritage course. This is also a course that we've had on the books, but would need to be modified slightly in order to fulfill the desired outcome. This course is designed as a language arts course for Spanish-speaking ELL students. And the state code requires that once a school has 20 or more ELL students in a particular language, that we provide language arts instruction in that language. So this course, sort of bringing it back and modifying it a little bit, would enable us to accomplish that outcome. That's a brief overview, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Are there any board questions on this? Mr. Collins.
Mr. Creech, I'm glad to see you're bringing down the requirement in grade level for social studies AP government class. I guess my question to you is, are there other courses that you're considering that you can bring down to the sophomore level or even the freshman level and let our kids challenge themselves?
It's a great question, and it's something that we continue to consider and continue to look for opportunities to bring AP classes sort of to all students. The College Board actually provides some guidance in this area, and they say specifically that AP courses should not be offered to freshmen, but in some areas, really more often in social studies than any other area, that there are some opportunities for kids to pursue this coursework. But in general, some of the hard sciences, I guess, College Board suggests that those are best placed at the junior and senior level, although certainly if we had students that were able to achieve at that level, I don't think we would want to exclude them from those courses.
Ms. Hirsch.
Thank you, Mr. Creech. I had asked you a number of questions in advance, and I appreciate the responses that you gave me. They were very, I think, detailed and not necessarily appropriate for the board table discussion. But one of the questions that I did have, and it's a little bit detailed, but it's talking about a specific subset of students, and that was the cohort students that are currently in our cohort program. Mm-hmm. I know that the recommendation for the cohort students was that they not take science in their freshman year. Mm-hmm. A number of them were offered a modified earth science course over the summer, and I don't recall the number of students that had enrolled in that, but there's a gap there because the earth sciences, the shift in our science curriculum, correct me if I'm wrong, is we're covering things in middle school that we had been covering at the high school. Mm-hmm. So there's a bit of a transition that we're going through over a number of years to ensure that all students are exposed to the materials they need to be prepared for the ACT. So can you help me, because I'm missing, I think there's this one set of students who is going to have a gap because they're not going to be exposed to earth science.
And that is something that we've considered and that we've looked at. In terms of preparing students for the ACT, first of all, I guess to answer the question, we would expect that the vast majority of students in the cohort to transition and take biology in the upcoming year. In terms of the gap in their understanding and their ability to be prepared for the ACT, we don't anticipate that this is going to be an issue for a couple of reasons. First of all, what is actually tested on the ACT has much more to do about science reasoning, interpreting data, sort of developing and understanding the scientific process, more of that than it does actual science content in earth science or biology or physics. Certainly, you'll see if you read the prompts that there are questions and they use those sciences as an example, but a student can absolutely figure out the response based on having a solid understanding of those foundations of science. So the other part of this is that these students can or will pursue coursework. Some of them, I guess you asked, approximately 20 went through the earth science program in the summer, and then the rest we would anticipate, although it would be a case-by-case review, but we would expect they would take biology and then another science course, probably chemistry, during the junior year.
Thank you. I applaud the shift. It's just that the question is the transition, and a piece of feedback coming from a number of parents that I've spoken to, and as well as PTSA meetings recently at York, really indicate a desire to have more communication and more explanation. And it's almost, for the class of, here are the offerings and how it's going to be laid out. And I would make that comment also in terms of inserting the new offerings, the etymology course. I'm not sure. I think it's a great idea. I love the idea for a course. I think it's going to only strengthen our kids' verbal abilities. Mm-hmm. But I'm unsure as to how it fits in to the overall scheme that is offered in the course book. And I don't know that that's available online, and I don't know. So I think I applaud the changes that we're making. I'm thrilled to see them brought to the board table for a little discussion mm-hmm. and a higher level of visibility. I think I just want to encourage the continued communication, in terms of what a standard college prep program would look like and which courses would fit in and what a high achieving program would look like. And those are the types of things that are sometimes difficult to discern. So I encourage you to work on the communication side of it as well, so that it's very clear to parents, especially, for instance, the science shift is a shift over 3 years. So people lose track of where we are. Mm-hmm. So
sure.
I applaud the efforts. I think the course offerings look good, and I'm looking forward to seeing them implemented.
Great.
Mr. Kralquist.
Mr. Creech, first of all, thank you and compliments to you and the entire staff at the high school for the work that went into this outcome, which is a set of recommended course adjustments. It's terrific. I mean, one of the things about York High School that I think that has always been very impressive is the coursework, the curriculum that is offered. It's very robust, but we know it's not just about quantity; it's about quality, it's about rigor, it's about alignment. And I think this list is impressive because it touches on each of those. It expansive, the improvement of alignment, and providing the opportunity for additional rigor. So thank you. My question would be is, so now this gets approved and we kind of go back to business. But what happens next? What's on the horizon? What are some of the things that the high school staff is talking about? What's the opportunity or the process for staff members, parents, students to continue to innovate and bring forward new ideas, new requirements that the board might be looking at down the road? Could you comment on that, please?
Sure. And I think to start with, to answer your initial question, what will happen next with these classes is I think that the chairs and the teachers who have worked on them will celebrate, but also start the hard work of ensuring that everything is in place for the 2011-2012 school year. So now that we've made it through sort of the hurdle of pursuing approval, there's a matter of pursuing materials and textbooks with each of the classes. And by design, we ask that we not select a text and build a class around that. The idea is that the group comes forward with the proposal, develops the curriculum, sort of the outcomes and objectives, and at the same time that that's going on, they are looking at resources. But there will be a decision-making process now that once the courses are approved, if you choose to approve them, where we look to the materials, what materials are necessary. In most cases, as I said, we have 7 courses that are already there in some form, so there isn't a tremendous amount of work. There will be a little more for the 2 new courses, so there will be an opportunity for team members to get together and develop that curriculum and also choose the materials. In terms of innovating, I think that is a real strength of each department and each chair within York. I think that through the professional connections and organizations that the teachers are involved with and that the chairs are involved with, they're able to network with other schools and sort of with an eye on what is emerging in the research, but also an eye on what other schools are doing and sort of the successes or maybe failures that they're having with different courses that they propose. So I think that you'll continue to see innovation and new proposals coming forward.
Mrs. Connery.
Mr. Creech, I think this proposal is wonderful, and it definitely gives us some added rigor, which is going to definitely improve our student achievement. Are we following are we noticing an increase in the amount of children that are enrolling in AP classes? And what are we doing so that the younger students understand the value of AP classes and striving to take them and what benefit it has for them if they're college bound?
Mm-hmm. I think we're doing a couple of things, and you'll see this or maybe you've seen it in the summer school proposal. We're looking in terms of preparing students to be able to take more rigorous coursework. We have proposals for a number of AP prep classes, so an AP science prep class, an AP social studies prep class, and English. So the idea would be that in these summer classes, students would have the opportunity to sort of become more familiar with the type of experience they'll have in the class. So maybe that's the reading, the type of writing that they'll be expected to do so they can hit the ground running in the fall when they take the classes. In terms of publicizing the value of AP classes, I think that happens throughout the system. I know individual teachers talk with kids sort of about the next sequence of classes, but we're also able to accomplish that through our freshman orientation and guidance program. There's a strong curriculum that's been developed, and counselors meet with students, teachers do also, throughout the first semester. And one of the points that keeps coming up in those conversations with counselors is what should students, sort of the grade point average, what coursework should they be pursuing. So I think there are a number of ways that we're sort of getting the message out there that these classes are important.
Mr. Creech, reiterating the board's comments, thank you for the work that was done on this. I think the changes are going to add some very good opportunity for the students at our high school. I do have a question, just kind of stepping back a step. I think all of these changes are excellent recommendations. Can you talk just a little bit about the process of how do we get to the 9? I mean, is every course area evaluated? Is there a cycle? It seems like these are grouped into a couple of different categories. So is this within the cycle? Are these the subject areas that are being evaluated?
Social studies is currently under review, but no, these aren't directly resulting from the curriculum review cycle. Again, it's really more to do with looking around at other schools, also pursuing the board goals, exposing more students to more rigorous curriculum, but also with some of the proposals around ELL, really working with the central office staff on ensuring that we're providing the coursework that we should be for that group of students. So I guess the proposals come from a number of different directions.
Dr. Krizik, I have one question that relates, I guess, to the connectivity of this. I know that some of the changes that we've made at the middle school science program were necessary to align with what we're doing in biology. For any of these other areas, are there things that we would recommend in the preparation coming into high school where we might look to make additional adjustments?
I'll defer that to Dr. Sullivan.
The one course that we've had some discussion with is actually the etymology course, and that's in terms of looking at our language arts work at the middle school specifically, because we do a little bit of that at the middle school level, and making sure that that is articulated all the way across. But we'll do that as that course is developed and we have a little bit more information.
If I can go back to something Mrs. Ostojic, recently Dr. Sullivan and I had met with Mr. Creech and Ms. Smith about reinstituting a kind of a 5-year course review cycle at York, to speak to your question, so that there is some systematic way in which all courses are reviewed on a regular basis. And that could lead to, Mr. Collins, the development of new courses as they look at existing courses and outcomes such as that. The other piece to that is that, in order to have all students be college and career ready, whether a student is going on to college or not, the rigor of an AP experience will serve a student well, even those that do not pursue college, because it is, again, it taps into some skills and some work habits that will be lifelong opportunities for students. So hopefully in the next several months or before the end of the school year, we'll come back at some point in time with what that 5-year course review cycle is going to look like, because that needs to be in alignment the same way that we do curriculum studies. So it's a little bit separate, and maybe we veered off over the years in terms of doing that in as a structured of a way as possible, but there was a great deal of enthusiasm around doing such a thing. The last thing I want to comment on is by bringing the course proposal process public, it's the first phase of the communication process, Mrs. Hirsch, because prior to this, new courses would have only been communicated either through a PTSA meeting or through a York course handbook, not in such a public venue. So now that we're attending, focusing our attention on this over the course of 2 meetings, Mr. Creech's overview and then next month's recommendation, it brings greater awareness with the community, some of the work that is being also done at the high school. So I think there's a lot of different pieces that this is beginning to accomplish, and by no means is this the only communication piece that needs to happen, but every communication piece needs to start somewhere, and this is a good launching place for this to happen.
Thank you. Any other board questions or comments? Again, thank you, Mr. Creech. We appreciate your time and the work done on this.
Appreciate it.
Our next item under Superintendent Communication is the overview of the school improvement plans. Dr. Krizek.
Dr. Sullivan has been really busy these past few months, and she's been spending a lot of time with all of the building principals with regards to updating their school improvement plans. I'd like for you to then, for her to share with you just a brief overview of those, and this follows the school report cards that were presented in October. And so, Dr. Sullivan.
Yeah, there's nothing brief about those school improvement plans, as you have your big, thick notebooks, right? So I'm pleased to present on behalf of the principals the 2010 school improvement plans. All of them except for Madison, for obvious reasons, are in the ISBE EAT plan template, which is the template that they provide on the Illinois Interactive Report Card site for us. It's No Child Left Behind compliant, which we all want to be. But one of the advantages is that the State Board pre-populates all that data in the template for the principals so that they don't have to do that themselves, which is a very nice thing. There is no new plan. There is a plan for York, but there's not a new plan for York because their plan from last year was a 2-year plan as part of having to have that plan approved by the State Board of Ed. So York will not have to write a new plan until next year. So that's why the one that's in your book is last year's plan. Okay. The process really just involves teams at the schools analyzing all of their data sources, not just the ISAT or the PSAE data, but any other data sources they have, and having some really thoughtful conversations about what that data looks like and why it looks the way that it looks. And then making some conclusions and planning some strategies as to what they're going to do to try to make the data look the way they would like it to look. The plans are not supposed to reflect everything that a school is doing to promote student achievement. It's supposed to be really reflecting some targeted strategies that a building sees as their greatest area of focus. So it's not meant to be every single thing that every school is doing. I think if you look through them, which I hope that you have, you'll see that reading and writing were the primary and most frequent goals that schools chose, followed by math and social and emotional learning in several of the plans. What I was pleased about is, and I think that you will see too, is that schools are more consistently looking at other data sources instead of just ISAT. And in many cases, some of their strategies or their objectives were really related to seeing student growth on things such as MAP, versus looking only at ISAT, which I think is a real growth that we're seeing. The other thing that I hope that you see when you look at it is more consistent use of some of the terminology that reflects some of the professional development that we've been doing with our administrators and our teachers. Words like professional learning communities, collaboration, flexible grouping, increased use of instructional time, research-based interventions, benchmarking, progress monitoring, all those things that we've been talking about, assessment for learning, you're starting to see that language come through in their school improvement plan. So I think that when I looked at last year's plans versus this year's plans, that was one of the big differences that I think I saw. Principals and teachers have put a lot of time in developing these, and they're already putting their time and effort to work on these strategies to improve achievement for all students. So I respectfully provide you those plans for your approval tonight.
Mrs. Davey.
Dr. Sullivan, I want to thank you and pass along to your staff. And Ms. Schnorr as well. I think you're equally involved in staffing and resourcing a lot of the work for and the resources for teachers. These are just a great representation of all the good work that's going on in our district to help students. I compare about 4 years ago what our school improvement plans look like versus what we're looking at today, and two things, and you highlighted them, come just jumping out at me. And one is that we are looking at multiple data sources. That has been a goal of our board for years, not just to depend on the one test that really didn't give us the information we really needed to know, or we had to disaggregate it and weren't able to. So using multiple data sources and looking at student growth, which is so more helpful to us, to look longitudinally at how our students are growing and developing. So those things jump out that we are doing some things very well in our district, and it's really good to see. As you reference, my question is leading towards goals seem to be heavily weighted towards math and literacy in general, reading and writing. And as we have received the report cards last month and seeing that we teeter around the state average in the minutes in the day that we allocate toward these core subjects, what are your observations and what are we doing, and what are the teams perhaps identifying as a way to come up with solutions to what we're struggling with, and that is that we are not devoting enough hours in the day to our core academics. I'm just using that as an overall statement. In some subjects we are okay, in others we aren't, though. Could you just comment on that?
Well, I think that teams are trying to squeeze out every possible second that they can to try to provide, especially for students who are struggling, that additional time that they need. And I think in some cases, to be honest, we're making some choices, maybe not great choices, between what's the most important piece for this particular student and having to make some choices about whether a student doesn't do one other piece of part of the curriculum so that we can work on this literacy piece, or just making some of those really strong decisions. I think they're trying to be creative in how we flexibly group to try to give kids, some additional time, or even to push the kids that we want to challenge. So I think people are trying to be very, very creative, but there is only so much time in the school day currently, and you can only slice it so many different ways, and I think they're just trying to figure out the best way that we can slice it, but still offer all those other things that we think are very important to a well-rounded, education. So it's not, there's no real easy answer to that.
Ms. Hirsch. I also want to pass along my thanks to the building principals and their teams, who I know spend many, many hours preparing these reports, and for you obviously reviewing them. I think one of the things that's interesting to me is that over time they seem to be that they're not cookie cutter, although they might follow the state format because we're required to. It is very clear in reading through each of the elementaries, the 3 middle schools, that they are really focused on their student population, on what their individual challenges are, where they are in terms of adoption of professional learning communities. And I think the thing that is impressive is that not only is it focused on the student progress and the student growth and what we're trying to do, but it integrates professional development and what the teaching staff is trying to do as a team overall to improve student achievement. So I think they're very well thought out. They're very detailed. One little note that I did notice in one of the reports, it was very interesting. One of the building principals at the elementary level was analyzing their data in terms of a number of different assessments, which we're looking for, multiple points of assessment. And I believe, if I have it correctly, I didn't bring the whole thing with me, but it was, I believe, the CMAP data was inconsistent with the ISAT data once it was decomposed and looked at on a student and looking at how the students were performing. And there was a relatively significant difference in terms of, I'll make up some numbers, the ISAT meet and exceed number was 90%, and a different assessment assessing the same children, I'm not sure that it was delivered on the same day, obviously, but it was at 80% or 75%, and then yet another measure was up at 90% again. So I think it's demonstrative of the fact that principals and teachers are looking very closely at what these tools are telling them, because I think we all agree that the ISAT is not necessarily the best measurement tool that we want to use. And we're able to look at cohort when we're looking at the CMAP data and the other types of data, because we can track kids as we go. So very detailed and a lot of attention to detail. And I was very happy to read through them all. So please, I know it's many, many hours, so please pass along our thanks.
Mrs. Deroni.
These plans are clearly a lot of work for the principals. Are they also working documents for them? Do they really use them? Do they direct the work that goes on in the school much in the same way that the strategic plan directs the entire work of the district? So in other words, is it worth it to go through? I know we have to, whether or not it's worth it, but is it a worthwhile tool?
You know, one of the things that I recommend for each of the buildings, and I know that many of them do this, is to convert this, because it is a huge document, to something that's called a plan on a page. And the idea is you put the really, really salient things that you can use on one page, so that that's what you share with teachers on an ongoing basis. That's what you carry around with you. That's what you share with your parents, so that it's really clear. So you can distill that 50, however many, 60-some page document into those, and that's really what makes it, a working document. That when you have those goals and those outcomes right with you, and something that you can look at easily on an ongoing basis. But the principals and teams, part of their job is to go back and look at these and to make sure that those strategies and activities that they outlined in such detail are being done. So I do think that as we get better at writing these and implementing these, they are becoming more of a living document. I can remember back when we used to do them and we would just file them, and I think that is no longer the case. But I also think it's better when principals follow through and do kind of that idea of having it on one page.
Just a couple more things. You referenced the fact that York's plan has not changed, that this is the second year, and I presume that's because they failed to meet AYP. What happens the following year? I mean, you get 3 years, or what is the process in this whole AYP? And I understand that it may all be subject to change if the Education Act, or whatever the title of it is, gets revamped and redone, which is a goal of the current federal administration. But suppose it doesn't, what happens?
And actually, because York doesn't take any Title I funds, they're actually under the state plan rather than the federal plan. So they're under the state law in terms of school improvement, which has there's a different little graph, which, I'd be happy to share with you. There's only, about 6,000 different arrows, and, if this happens, that happens, et cetera. If York would not make AYP in this next testing cycle, they're in academic early warning year 2. They go into academic watch year 1. We write another 2-year school improvement plan. If we don't make it the following year, or in 2012, that's when we have to write a restructuring plan. And there are varying options that the state outlines as to what is acceptable as restructuring. But that plan would have to be written in 2012 for implementation in the following school year. Restructuring plans are written at the district level and not at the school level. And we would have some assistance with that from the Regional Office of Education. Again, just as you said, it's all in flux, though we are in the state system, so it not only requires No Child Left Behind to be changed, but state law has to be changed. We're one of the few states that has 2 simultaneous school improvement planning systems in place.
So with all the press now about all these schools, York being one of them, that is really a fabulous educational place, failing, don't things have to change? I mean, it's 2014, we're all going to fail, right? Because we all have to meet or exceed state standards. That's not that far away. What is the word? Are there things being done at the state level to... Is there any time at the state level to worry about anything other than paying bills? I mean, who's looking at this to see whether or not we're all going to fail in 2014?
And maybe Dr. Krizik, after coming from Washington, has some information. I'm not aware of anything that's happening at the state level. I think they're all waiting for the feds to do something with ESEA.
And those conversations might start as early as the spring, but we don't anticipate legislation to move as quickly as we had hoped. Certainly it was President Obama's agenda 2 years ago, but there are things like health care and a few other things that had gotten in the way of the changes to the Elementary, Secondary, and Education Act. We hear Arnie Duncan, and he reaffirmed this today, is that they're going to have systems of accountability, but moving towards a growth model. We don't know what that's going to look like, but that's been reaffirmed over and over and over again. And so while it might shift off, I'm not so because we did not get raised to the top dollars. That's another piece to all of this. That would have pushed some restructuring, I believe, to the state of Illinois rules and regulations if we would have received raised to the top dollars, because some of the timelines would have changed. But we also know that the assessment system is not changing until 2014. So we are going to be under the current ISAT PSAE assessment system for the next 2 to 3 years, however that plays out. And so I don't envision a huge shift in the AYP piece at this point in time, but knowing where we're going to go forward. Illinois is one of more than a handful of states that's sitting at the table with regards to a common assessment, or basically more of a national assessment that will be aligned with the Common Core standards. So we anticipate that that's coming, but we should be planning for that now, which we are, because we're beginning the work already with the power standards and proficiency scales aligned with the Common Core standards. So we, as we move forward with our plan and process, we should have probably a system of some experience with common assessments that we can make some adjustments, those common assessments being then aligned to college readiness standards and Common Core standards. So I think we are being very proactive on this front, which should position us well in 2014 when all the assessment changes happen, when they change. I do want to say, though, Mrs. Deroni, that we too internally are looking at growth, even though we're looking at whether a school meets AYP or not. And as we pointed out at the last board meeting when we reviewed the school report card, we're substantively seeing some closing of the gaps between the performance level of our students at various levels. We're seeing the implementation of adoptions like Springboard and Reading Street having substantive impact on student achievement across subgroup areas and across schools. So, we're very, again, the progression is in the right progression. And the fact that Churchville and Fisher made AYP this year was a positive indicator. We think that's an incredibly positive indicator. And they made tremendous strides. Both of them made substantive strides last year. And there are systems and structures in place at both of those schools that we would anticipate continued improvement being in those schools. We would anticipate that that's happening. Now, the AYP status moves from 77.5% to 85% next year. So school-wide, we are going to have some schools
that are going to hover near that. And then we have the subgroups to deal with. So, this year, I'll say we have a lot to celebrate. We only had one school that did not meet AYP. Next year, we might have, we'll have at least one, but we might have maybe two more, maybe not. I mean, a lot is happening between now and then. And then the substance and quality of the school improvement plans and the focus effort of what's going on in the schools is really helping to change some of the outcomes for students.
Just one last question. We do a lot, and I've seen a lot in the York plans and the coursework and everything that they're doing to prepare students for the ACT. Do we do similar things to prepare students for the PSAT, the one that brings the students before us that we're here tonight? Are there the same types of coursework and same emphasis?
I would say in general, York's focus has been preparing students for the ACT. Mostly because that's part of our state assessment system, and I think historically, the Midwest has focused on the ACT as the test. Historically, it's been the two coasts were more SAT kinds of spots. That's changing across the country. Most schools now accept both tests. Schools now actually, there is some advantage to students to take both because most schools now will take the higher of the two. They have a way of figuring out there are equivalence tables between the ACT and the SAT, and schools will look at which one students do the best on and take that one, which then it's to our students' advantage to have both. I think courses like the etymology course that is just being proposed is a fabulous preparation for the SAT in particular, which focuses more on some problem solving and some of the vocabulary versus the ACT, which tends to focus more on content. One of the things that I think that we're having conversations about is that we currently, because we do the plan and the PSAT on the same day, that doesn't allow our sophomores to take the PSAT, and sophomores are allowed to take the PSAT. It doesn't put them in the scholarship piece, but it's a practice SAT. And I think we should have some conversations about, what should that schedule really look like, because it would allow, if we change that, we could allow sophomores to have that opportunity as well. And currently now when we do the PSAT, not all of we have about 250 for the last 3 years, it's been pretty stable, take the PSAT out of the junior class. The way we've got it scheduled currently, their choice is the PSAT or a practice ACT. And I think that's a difficult choice. That can be a difficult choice for some juniors who know that they're going to be taking the ACT coming up, and here's a free practice that I'm going to, be able to get. And I think as a parent, I'd have a hard time making that choice too. So we're having some conversations about what that schedule should look like, and there are advantages. There are disadvantages taking another instructional day for testing. But I think we have to have some conversations about whether or not we should be, incenting kids to take the PSAT, and incenting as many juniors as we can and as many sophomores who are interested in taking it. But those are conversations that we're beginning.
It's been a while since I've had anything to do with either of those testing systems, but it seemed to me at the time when I knew a lot of the kids who were taking them more personally because they were friends of my children, that the PSAT kind of caught some kids who maybe didn't test well in the ACT or didn't, sort of sleepers. They didn't have the straight A's, but yet they were really, really intelligent kids who, you'd see the list and go, really? Who knew? That kind of thing. It just seemed to be testing a little bit different type of intelligence that, I don't know that we want to ignore is all. But I know there's a lot to be done on every day, and you're doing a good job.
Thank you, Mr. Collins.
Dr. Sullivan, I as well am glad that you're here. But can you give me an idea of your proposed time frame for resolving these scheduling issues so that we can encourage our kids to challenge themselves and take all of the tests that are available? And are Saturdays an option?
Well, the issue with Saturday is cost, because we'd have to pay for proctoring of the assessment on Saturday. So that would be a piece of what we'd have to take into consideration. For example, the Explore test that we just did the timesheets before I came here, and I think it was $7,800, I think, cost of proctoring. So there are, when you go to a Saturday, there are some associated costs, and we'd have to build that in to any proposal. But I think in a cabinet report I had shared that we had some conversations, Diana Smith, Dave Creech, and I, about the schedule. And even this year, we've put in some more, a practice explore, a practice plan, some of those pieces in. So we'll be looking at what next year's schedule will look like, and that conversation about the PSAT will occur with that. But doing it on a Saturday, we would just have to figure out, can we afford to do that? Or is there another way to do that?
So do I hear you saying that we'll have that figured out by this coming fall? Thank you.
Mr. Carlquist.
As boards of education, we spend time on reviewing check registers, levy, facilities, HR, staffing, and so forth. But perhaps other than doing things like we always say, recognition of our students and their achievement, this is the most important thing that goes on in our district and is of real interest to the board. And so first of all, while we've spent some fair amount of time on this, not anywhere close to the amount of time that staff I know has invested in this, and rightfully so. They're the experts, and this is where the time should be devoted. My interest is, and I think in answer to Mrs. Droney's question, Dr. Sullivan, you answered part of this. Clearly, there is, I hope, more than the compulsory aspect of this, that there's value in the process, value in doing the data analytics, the collaboration among staff, the action planning that comes as a result of it, and also, as you talked about, the fact that there's something to committing to writing, even though it's an obligatory template and rather voluminous at that for the schools, but there's something of value of committing in writing those actions, those plans, and outcomes and the like, because there's some accountability, I think, that's able to be driven as a result of that. People can go back and revisit it. My question is, as the staff finishes, and there's probably a collective sigh of relief, across the schools, when they're done and they're ready to put this binder on the shelf, is there something that's done formally to facilitate socializing across the district what the other schools have done, or the learnings that come out of, say, School A at one level with School B? It would seem to me that other than just, passing around the PDF files and asking, other buildings and administrators and teachers to read, is there something that's done to perhaps, maybe it's the one sheet that you described, to provide the best of, so that we can lift ourselves up by our collective bootstraps?
Well, I know one of the best professional development opportunities that I had as a building principal is when I sat down with other building principals and we shared our school improvement plans, or what worked and what didn't work, and what strategies we thought about. And that's the kind of thing that we would like to do with principals here, because it really, someone will come up with an idea, and I'm all for stealing a great idea and trying to implement it in the way that'll make sense for a particular school. So I think having an opportunity for our building principals at their levels to really share the kinds of strategies that they've put in place, and to have that discussion. I know school teams do that, and I know that our teachers do that when they see other teachers from other buildings in some of the committee work and things. So that's the kind of thing that we've talked about and done last year, and we would like to do that again now that it's done. They've got that part done. But usually after they've had some time to implement some of the things that are in there, to really talk about what did work, what didn't work, et cetera.
Mrs. Conroy.
Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. This is wonderful. And looking back to the last time we saw this, is a tremendous improvement, and really a great progress. My question is in regards to NCLB, and I think most people will agree that understand NCLB that the standards are becoming almost unattainable. And as that's happening and the percentages are getting so much higher, are we doing anything to communicate to our stakeholders so that they have an understanding of exactly what that means?
You say stakeholders, you mean our parents? I think secretly we've all been hoping that this law was going to change sooner than later, because I think that what we've been trying to do is focus on student growth and not focus on that AYP line, and really looking at, are we making progress as a school? Are we making progress with particular groups of students? Are we making progress with this individual student? And I think that that's where we've tried to go with staff as well. With trying to downplay the ISAT, especially because it's such a low bar, that, if we're going to look at it, we need to be looking at the exceeds piece, because that's the only piece that tells us a little bit of something. But really that we need to be looking at student growth and other data points. So I think that that's the message we also have to have for our public, but it's extremely hard to carry that message when what gets published by my friends over there is, that AYP data and the ISAT data, because that's what gets published in the newspaper.
I completely agree with you, and I think that educating the community so that they understand really the unrealistic levels that NCLB are putting us at and what AYP really means is important.
I'm going to reiterate just quickly some of the comments that my fellow board members have made that I'm fully in support of or in agreement with. I think the change in focus of these school improvement plans has been really important. We've had conversation over the years about, teaching to the test, and what we're focusing on is real student growth. We know that our ISATs are not aligned with the ACTs, and we've had a lot of conversation with that over the last several years. And whether we like it or not, ACT and SAT, they have impact on the future opportunities of our students, whether they get into college, what kind of financial support that they can get as they get in there. So those are tests that are high stakes. They are very important. The ISAT, low bar. We're required, the focus of the school improvement plan has to be a measurement against AYP for the ISATs, but I appreciate the fact that we've gone much beyond that, and we're really looking at student measurement and growth. So I'm again going to reiterate, I think that this shows some a lot more depth in thinking and planning and looking at really what's in the best interest of our students, and have been able to marry that with this requirement for these school improvement plans. But I think we've really taken ownership of these and taking them far beyond what the requirement is, which I think is very important for the growth of our district. So thank you, Dr. Krizik, Dr. Sullivan, and to all of the buildings for much of the hard work that's gone into this. With that, we will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the York Stadium lighting and sound evaluation reports.
When we began the process of applying for a revision to the 1986 ordinance with regards to light and sound use at the Clarence D. East Field, we initially went into the ordinance hearing with the same structures and systems that we currently had in place. We received community feedback at that September 9th hearing that both light and sound appeared to be significant issues for many of the neighbors in the surrounding area. As a result of the September 9th hearing, we were directed to gather some additional information, including conducting an assessment of our lights as well as an assessment of our sound. When we held our forum, our community forum on September 30th, again, the same emerging issues of encouraging the district to have a light and sound evaluations completed emerged. And when the York Community Advisory Committee met, that too they felt was going to be a critical piece of information that we would bring forth back to the Zoning and Planning Commission. So that responsibility for having those evaluations done was given to our Director of Buildings and Grounds, Mr. Shu, who I believe may have representatives from both the sound and lighting companies who had done those assessments. I think it's important to point out two things. Is the existing lighting at the stadium was installed in 1986 and hasn't been changed since 1986. It was originally installed by Musco Lighting, a company that is considered to be the premier lighting company working with sports complexes, both public and private complexes. And then we also had a sound assessment system as well. So without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Mr. Shu, who will begin to try to explain some complicated things like what does spill mean and what do decibels mean and all of those sorts of things. So Mr. Shu, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Krizik, and I'll give a brief overview and then, more importantly, hand it over for questions as quickly as possible. Those of which operationally I can answer, I'll do so, and those which might be more technically specific, I'll look to Mr. Miller from Musco Lighting and Mr. Dykehouse from Integra Systems for their expertise. I guess an easy way to understand this and what we found that we can achieve is there's kind of good news, bad news in both areas. In the lighting area, the good news is with the technology that's available today as opposed to what was available in 1986, it is possible to provide high quality, even lighting on the playing surface of the high school with little to no spill of light into the neighbors. By using reflective directional lighting, with a hooded system, if you will. What we're effectively doing is focusing the light that we produce onto the stadium surface and not into the neighborhood or up into the atmosphere as light pollution. This has a few positive effects. One, obviously, the neighbors like us better. Two, we can achieve the same lighting levels with less energy use, which generates a potential savings depending on in the numbers that were given to you at 200 hours a year over 10 years. That would look like $20,000 in savings. If our proposals as they existed for 100 dates were to go forward at some time in the future, which might lead to closer to 400 hours a year, that savings might look like more like $40,000 over the course of 10 years. The negative to the lighting solution is that while it's extremely effective and would have the effect of bringing light spill into the neighboring yards down under the 1 foot candle level. And actually, David, if you could just put the foot candle chart, the one that about comparative foot candles. Yeah, there was some question as to, what in the name of God is a foot candle anyway? I guess one definition is if you have a 1 foot radius piece on the ground and you have one candela in the middle of the surface, that's the amount of light that's given off. Of course, that tells you nothing. So what we see there is full moon is 0.01 foot candles, deep twilight 0.1, twilight 1 foot candle. 1 foot candle is the standard that most parking lots will try to achieve throughout the parking lot. A well-lit parking lot, the darkest part of the parking lot might be 1 foot candle. A general guideline that we've tried to live with and coexisting with our neighbors at some of our schools where we have parking lots or school lighting that might influence their yard is trying to keep our light levels below the 1 foot candle level at our property line throughout the district. So what would happen with this lighting is our levels would be significantly under 1 foot candle in any of the neighboring properties in any direction from the stadium with the lighting. So it would also have almost no glare effect. One of the other things you'll find with lighting is you'll get lighting levels down to where you can't even get a reading on the light meter, or you can't see the light meter to read the reading if you did. But you'll still get complaints about the glare, because if someone can see the light source directly, there's a certain, even at a distance, there's a certain glare with that. I mean, the full moon might only provide the 0.01 foot candles that's on that chart there, but as we all know, if we look directly at the full moon, it's noticeable. Obviously, even at a 1-foot candle level, if you have direct sight of the light source, there's a glare annoyance, if you will, to anyone who happens to have that. Another advantage of a reflected and hooded system, of course, is nobody outside of the stadium would have a direct vision of the light source. The actual bulb itself is recessed in. Looking at the stadium, they'd see a lit area, but you would not get that glare annoyance in neighboring properties. So the wonderful news is that a lighting solution using current technology would be extremely effective, also allowing us greater control to both track how long it's on, what our use is over time, what our energy use is over time, to be able to print out on-off times to verify for compliance with neighbors who might be curious as to whether we're actually keeping to the number of days and or the number of hours that we say that we're going to use the lights. Once again, extremely effective. The downside, of course, is this is not an inexpensive solution. The budget estimate for the lighting retrofit itself was at this year's pricing estimated to be roughly $105,000 to $115,000. This would, of course, does not allow for unforeseen conditions. The poles would need to be inspected to make sure that they're intact and usable so that we can extend the warranty on the lighting for 10 years. It would also does not account for the possibility of having to add additional lights in some places in the stadium, smaller ground, lower level lights for entrance areas and the such, where on game nights now we benefit, if you will, from the amount of light that spills out from the stadium and don't have to provide lights for those areas. Some of those areas might need some additional lighting put in for game nights in particular. But anyways, allowing for unforeseen conditions, increases in prices, and maybe some additional lighting that wasn't included in the retrofit, the budget would probably be set somewhere about $150,000. So the downside is, while extremely effective and I think would make the neighbors pleased greatly, it is an expensive solution. When we talk about what a sound solution looks like, we have just the reverse. The good news, the positive news there is that a significant improvement to the way that we distribute sound in the stadium today can be achieved relatively inexpensively. One of the reasons that we project as much sound out into the neighborhood as we do is because in 2005, when our sound system was installed new along with the bleacher and press box project, we were not disturbing the track or the field at that time. So we achieve sound in the visitor side of the stadium and in the gravel area of the stadium and other areas by large directional speakers located on the home side that pushes the sound in that direction. Of course, an unfortunate consequence of that is that we push sound throughout the neighborhood, over the visitors' stands, and into the neighbors, not only to our obvious proximate neighbors to the south, but also well into the neighborhoods to the north of the field. Trying to adjust these volumes with the existing equipment as is to make it less intrusive on the neighbors is almost impossible in a game day situation. We found is if we turn the levels on those speakers down low enough to not be intrusive on the neighbors along Winthrop, the sound is not audible in the visitor stands with the crowd noise and ruckus that goes on there. So the balancing act with the current equipment is nearly unachievable. We have a couple fortunate things. One, the system that we have is being installed in 2005, still relatively current, addressable and updatable. It can be added to without any addition to the front end of our sound system. Secondly, when we did the track and field project, we had the foresight to lay 2 conduits, PVC conduits, underneath the track and field between the home and visitor side. There was no function for those conduits identified at the time of the project, but the feeling was that something was bound to arise, and this is such a something. So given the fact that the pathway for the sound system exists, given the fact that we can redeploy some of the speakers that are currently in use and maybe only purchase 2 additional speakers for closer delivery of the sound on the visitor side, this project can be completed very economically somewhere at or under $10,000. The bad news on the sound side is because of the physics of sound, it's not as or will ever be as perfect a solution as light can be. We can produce and have produced some lighting graphs which will show you exactly what your expected foot candle level is at any given spot that you might choose to stand. And that's something that can be done with a computer program and given the lighting conditions, and light doesn't change regardless of temperature or wind direction or how many people are or are not in the stadium. The physics of sound is different. We can't produce a chart that will tell you exactly what a decibel level will be at any given spot depending on where you're sitting, because even if you set audio levels to an existing preset level that you predictably know what the output at the speaker is, given temperature, humidity, wind direction, whether the stadium is full of bodies to absorb that sound or empty to allow sound to echo, sound can carry very differently within the neighborhood. Also, because of the extreme proximity of our neighbors on the, to the south of the tracks, any maintaining of audible levels of sound in the home side or near the concession areas is bound to be at least audible in those yards. Clearly, we can do a lot to lessen the levels that are currently experienced, and by improving the system of delivery, we would greatly reduce our impact in the community, but it's not as an exact science as lighting, and can't be guaranteed to be as successful as lighting would be as far as not having community impact. Though I think the neighbors have already indicated at the recent commission hearing that they noticed our attempts to make adjustments to sound to a positive extent, just what we've done with the existing arrangement of speakers and equipment. So we do feel confident that with going through this process and adjusting it and getting it to where we're just providing sound as close to the actual end user of the sound as possible and at levels that are necessary, that we can reduce that impact even further, especially for those neighbors who are a little further away from the stadium and are receiving projected sound now. So that is kind of an overview of how the two projects look. I can take some questions, and I said Mr. Miller and Mr. Dykehouse are here to answer any technical questions that you might feel you want more illumination on, no pun intended.
Any board questions or comments? Ms. Hirsch.
The detailed documents that were provided in terms of the light spill with the light candles only demonstrated an evaluation of the light spill currently and with a proposed solution on Spring Road, which is apparently from approximately, I guess, not quite close to the railroad tracks all the way up to St. Charles. And I believe that there was also an evaluation maybe on St. Charles from the intersection of Spring Road back to the high school, but I'm not sure about that. My understanding was that the primary concern area for the light spill were the neighbors that back up to the railroad tracks and are right behind the stadium on Hillside, and that we were surprised that the neighbors that were on the Spring Road side and east were affected by the lights. So I'm concerned the proposal that was put in front of us didn't evaluate the light spill on the side that was what I thought was our primary area of concern with the lights.
No, and I'm glad you asked that. The drawing as it exists and the drawings that that Mr. Miller was able to work off of that I sent him, you see that study along there more because that's our property and that's where we had accurate drawings of. The lighting levels are geometrically even, so the south and the lighting levels at the same distances to the south and west would be the same as they are to the north and east. If you could imagine completing that square, it would just be the mirror of those same lighting levels going the other direction. And as you can see, at relatively short distances, those levels are quite low. We could certainly, and I will have it done so, that produce a full square of estimated lighting levels that shows something into what the areas that would be in the tracks and behind the stadium, but those drop-offs would be equal before we reach the other people's property as they are on the Spring Road. Once again, the reason for the drawings looking the way they are was more because that was the easily accessible side of the stadium to walk, and because that's where our drawings were for. We don't have drawings of the backyards behind there. We can certainly produce that, but the lighting is an equal rectangle, so those numbers will look the same on the flip side as they do. The south and west would look the same as the north and east.
Mrs. Davy.
Mr. Schuh, I think one thing that you didn't talk about was the height of the poles. And I know that's been a conversation that when they were in 1986 that they were put higher or lower. I don't even remember the history of controversy, but are we able to use the same height of poles? Can we retrofit this on the existing ones? Are they going to be any lower, or what's the impact of the spill on the poles?
The original 1986 ordinance contains a height restriction. I can't answer. I don't know what went into that decision at the time. I'm sure, like everything else, it was widely discussed and disseminated before they arrived at the height that it's currently at. There's some widespread opinions throughout the community that if they had been allowed to be higher, maybe the spill wouldn't be as bad because of the directional advantage of height, or that maybe these poles are too low to put a modern lighting system on and we'll have to replace the poles, which would be both largely increased expense and may involve a second ordinance change, which I don't think we relish going forward with. So the good news is those poles were installed by Musco originally. They have looked at them. Those poles are of a height that will work with a modern directional lighting system. We will not need to change those poles. A worst case scenario would be if we got inside the poles and found there was something wrong with one of them structurally where it would have to be replaced. But it would be replaced. That's the kind of unforeseen conditions that we're talking about when we leave a little room in the budget. But it would be replaced with a pole the same height. It wouldn't require a change to the ordinance. And of course, if we did find a structural problem that we didn't previously know about, we looked at it as a benefit and not a negative. So,
Mr. Carlquist.
Mr. Schuh, just in terms of the economics and the value to the district and to the community, in rough numbers, $150,000 is the proposal, $40,000 of economic savings over 4 years, $110,000 spread across 10 years, about $11,000 per year of cost is what for whatever that lifespan is what the board's being asked to approve. And not to diminish the importance of being a good neighbor and solving the concerns that have been raised in terms of audio and lighting to that entire neighborhood. And you're right, the concern is not just the immediate neighborhood, or the impact is not just the immediate neighborhood. It does, light and sound pollution does spill over a rather large area across the community. Are there other benefits that had not been discussed that you would highlight that is something that the board should take into consideration as a part of the overall value, closing the value equation of that, roughly $11,000 a year? I mean, for being good neighbors, or what else?
Right. A couple things. One, I'd like to just back for a second. And the reason for looking at it as a 10-year payback level, what are our savings over 10 years, identifying 10 years, is because with the use of the existing poles and the retrofit we're talking about, we'd probably be looking at a 10-year parts and labor warranty for keeping costs beyond the project down to close to nothing for the maintenance of those lights for the first 10 years. So I think that's an easy number to deal with. Beyond that, you would have to estimate the ongoing maintenance and life cycle costs of the lights beyond the 10 years. The other benefits that you might gain from the lighting upgrade and the sound upgrade probably don't measure economically with hard numbers. But of course, if you have a lighting system that's addressable, that can be turned off remotely at a moment's call, we greatly reduce not only the possibility of being in violation of our agreements with the neighbors, but also just lost electrical dollars to lights that were on when they shouldn't be for no reason. It also allows for the potential to schedule the lights off at certain times, so maybe we aren't expending labor dollars to oversee just the turning off of a light. The sound system, I think, and I don't know how you put a quantitative dollar value on this, but we do have the opportunity to provide sound in a more even way in the area that we have now. Unfortunately, because we're blasting sound in every which direction currently, you don't necessarily, while we're providing plenty of sound to our neighbors, there are dead areas within the stadium where you don't hear that well. There are dead areas on the field where you don't hear that well. It's kind of an irony of the way the system was done 5 years ago, unfortunately. So there's certainly some intrinsic value in, while taking sound out of the neighborhood, putting more sound where it's actually desired in the stadium.
Mr. Collins.
I attended the meeting at York and attended part of one of the ordinance hearings. What I thought I heard from the community, and please confirm or straighten me out here, is that the surrounding community's concern was more about sound than lights. Is that consistent with your understanding?
I would say by far the larger number of people have sound concerns than light people. Of course, until you talk to one of the people who the lights shine right into their windows, in which case the lighting issue immediately goes way beyond the sound issue as a concern. So I think there's a greater number of people with concerns about the sound. I think there's a more passionate small core of people who are affected by the lights.
And the people with the lighting concern, tell me where those people are located.
I would say along Hillside, anywhere south of the tracks along the stadium, and then of course our neighbors on Winthrop that back of their houses back up to the baseball field would be the largest. Also, apparently, depending on the season and the leaves on the tree, some of the neighbors over more towards where the tracks intersect St. Charles Road and coming down the road there also seem to be affected by the lights.
I thought I heard several people complain that they have small children and their children couldn't sleep with the light pouring in the window. And I live a few hundred feet from the Eisenhower Expressway, and at a point in Elmhurst where the Eisenhower Expressway is just a few hundred feet from the Tri-State Expressway. And I do have small children, and the light pours in their windows all night. And those poles are a lot higher than 80 feet. So my heart goes out to all of them. My solution was, since I think I correctly figured that I would not get anywhere by calling the state highway system or the tollway, was to install blackout shades in my children's windows. For those specific neighbors that have that concern, I mean, can you estimate the number of neighbors that have that concern?
You know, I'd be very hesitant to put a number on that. Even if I were to look at a map and count the houses that I think are affected by the light, I think if we've learned nothing else from the community feedback over the last couple months, is that I would likely misguess as to who's negatively impacted or not. And
have we at all discussed the possibility of the district buying blackout shades for those children's bedroom windows, which I think, at my guess, and please, I'm looking to you to add some numbers to this, would be at a fraction of the cost of a new light, of the $150,000 for a new lighting system?
Well, obviously, we haven't looked into that option, and I can't guess as to the cost for that at the moment. Obviously, it would bring up a number of logistical questions about providing that in the interior of people's houses and maintaining it over time.
I'm not suggesting we send custodians in.
Some of the neighbors who were at those meetings would be adamant about the fact that the lights also affect their enjoyment of their yard, some of the other areas of their house, or just their ability to operate in the way that other neighbors are used to.
I think legally we don't have the ability to make any infrastructure changes to any household residences, interior, exterior. Our only ability would be to control what's on our own property by either installing trees or which we had, I guess, in 1986. But as Mr. Hsu pointed out, when the trees lose their leaves, I think it is two questions or responses, Mr. Collins. I think Mr. Shu was accurate in saying, I think we could not give accurate numbers of who's affected by the lighting because we've had residents as on Eggleston who had indicated that there were lighting issues, and I don't really even think we had anticipated the Winthrop issues when we began this ordinance hearing process. There are also portions of St. Charles Road in either direction that are affected by the lighting, and again, it's the directionality of the lighting. I think, as it related to Mr. Karlka's question, embarking potentially on this path not only is somewhat more cost effective, and is our desire, and from a policy standpoint, is to try to find more efficient ways of using energy. It is in alignment with that energy efficiency piece, but it would potentially provide even better lighting that exists at the stadium, which certainly is another safety issue. Now, that's on the immediate field, and then obviously the solution would require some under the stadium lighting or around the entrance lighting, because when you reduce the spill that much, then you have darkened areas. So I believe legally we cannot make any changes or offer any interior solutions to anyone's household. And, that could, people move over time and they say, I don't really like these blackout shades and I'm taking them down. And, we couldn't be responsible for any replacement costs with the next family moving in. So I think we have only a responsibility for our own property and managing the fixtures and lighting and sound on our own property.
Ms. Masterton, how much money do we have and I assume this money would come out of the capital improvements budget? How much money remains in that budget?
If you give me about 5 minutes, I can answer that question.
I'll be perfectly patient.
Okay, I'm not really sure. Frank, do you remember how much there is?
Yeah, it's somewhere in the vicinity of $3 million of funds still available. I wouldn't want to quote an exact dollar off, but it's in that vicinity.
And approximately, what's the cost of a school roof?
Of a school roof?
Yeah.
Our school is very greatly in the square footage of roofs.
We just redid Madison School's roof. What did we spend?
The budget number for Madison's school roof ended up coming in. Do you remember offhand? It was. No, it was low because we ended up. No, it was, and we ended up not having to do a tear off. So I want to say it came in like 100,000-ish area.
But if we had to do a tear off.
Right. It can vary depending on whether we're doing a resurface or a tear off. It can, Madison's a small school. We have some large schools out there. On the 10-year plans that I've been updating pretty much twice a year for as long as I've been doing them, there are a number of schools whose roofs are coming out of warranty over the next year, 2 years. That means they're hitting that 15-year age. While I don't think we'll be recommending replacing all of them at once, for one, because they aren't all failing yet, and two, because we don't have the kind of money to be that proactive at this time. And a glance at that document can show you that we have, a large potential obligation to maintaining the roofs that will have to be done somewhere in the next 2 to 5 years.
And my other question is to replenish the money in that capital expenditure account. Do we put a little money in every year from property taxes that we collect?
No, capital project funds are generally broken out and funded through either debt certificates or bonds. We have no bond capability we have no capability to issue bonds. We do have a budget in our operations and maintenance fund. We do have a fairly good balance on our operations and maintenance fund that we hold for a lot of special projects. So I can't say that we don't have the budget for it. We also have some life safety funds as well, which may or may not, fall into the categories of roofs. So we have funds, but obviously we're looking at some hard times as we move forward from there. So no, we don't levy for capital project funds. You can transfer funds from O&M to the capital projects fund.
And other than that transfer, how would we replenish that account?
Sale of bonds
So
or
we
debt certificates.
We would have to ask the taxpayer for a referendum and a tax increase?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm just in my mind, the reason for my questions, and I'm just trying to put this in context in my mind of what our alternative uses of that money are, what we're going to need to be spending that money on in the future as these roofs come out of warranty, and put that in the larger context of how we responsibly spend the taxpayers' money, especially the only way it seems that we would replenish that account is to ask the taxpayer for more.
Ms. Masterton, do we have the capability, and I know interest rates are low, but do we have the capability of transferring earned interest from any account into the capital projects account? Do we have any capability of transferring that money into the O&M account and then transferring unexpended money from the O&M into that account? So there is the opportunity to transfer money into that account, correct? Now, we do use working cash as managing our cash balances, correct? Is there any opportunity to transfer money into working cash for any capital project into the O&M fund?
There's a possibility of partially abating your working cash fund and moving it into your operations and maintenance fund for a project or for just, either one. There's a possibility of doing that into any of your operations funds, yes.
And Mr. Shu, are there any opportunities for any grants in either lighting and or sound grants to help us offset the cost of the implementation of any new lighting, particularly if it meets some of the qualities of energy efficiency and so on and so forth?
Yes, there are State of Illinois lighting grants, which we've been applying. We used it to update the lighting in the high bay and gym areas at the high school at very low cost to the district after the grant. We're doing so right now, currently replacing some parking lot fixtures and other outdated fixtures that need to be repaired anyway, that we're taking advantage of grant money to put in more high efficiency fixtures at a very low cost to us. But the reason that those projects are such a low cost to us is the grants are given by how much energy you save. So a couple things. We're doing the labor in-house, so we don't have a labor component to the project, and we're able to save a great amount of energy with the replacement of these lights. We would apply for a grant in relation to this project, and depending on what the levels were, it could be from $5,000 to $15,000. $5,000 at the lowest level that the DECO grant is. In the past couple of years, they've offered double and triple grant levels as the year has gone on. We expect that might be the case again this year. So it might be $10,000 or $15,000 instead of $5,000. But the reason it's such a low percentage of the overall cost of the project as compared to the other things we've done is because a much lower percentage of the cost of this project is in the actual cost of the fixtures, and a much higher percentage of the cost of the project is in the labor and the lifts and the getting the equipment to where it goes. So while there is an energy savings, because we would be lighting the field with 48 fixtures as opposed to, or 58 fixtures as opposed to the 80 that we have now, and that for each of those kilowatt hours saved, we have some grant potential, and it would be an offset to the cost. It would not be as neutralizing to the cost as the other projects we've been able to complete.
Mr. Collins, just to give you the information, we have $2,328,127 in our capital project funds as of the end of October, and $1,055,342 in life safety funds as of the end of October.
So that's less than 10 roofs.
Mrs. Davey.
Dr. Krizik, we've heard a lot of the technical side of lights and sound, and I'm assuming this is foreshadowing that you're going to be recommending that we would move forward with this. But I guess my questions are, what's the climate with the Zoning and Planning Commission and approval of any ordinance, and what if we don't do this? What are the implications of us not moving forward with addressing light and sound in this manner?
I certainly at the September 9th hearing indicated to them that we would embark on lighting and sound evaluations without committing any fiscal resources and knowing what our resources are. I think as this ordinance process has gone forward, Mrs. Davey, I really do think that we will be expected to make some changes. They are looking at the Oak Park ordinance as potentially a model, which is a much more complex ordinance document that isn't currently in existence than the 1986 document. I would, since this ordinance hearing process is continuing, and the next meeting is, I believe, January 13th, Thursday, January 13th, I believe at that meeting we will hear more from the Zoning and Planning Commission in terms of what their specific expectations are of us. We have spent, I believe, a significant amount of time at these ordinance hearings, taking a lot of questions from those individuals that are appointed and serve on that committee. And the level of detail and accountability, the issues of enforcement and accountability, have become strong, dominating issues throughout these entire conversations. And our ability, I believe, to capture the support of all of the residents, or the majority of the residents on this, will be somewhat contingent upon our putting a plan in place for addressing lighting and sound issues. Whether that has to be implemented before the ordinance is approved, or if we have a grace period, there's certainly probably that opportunity for conversation. But if there is a time frame that is established as part of that ordinance, then at some point in time we'd have to reallocate those resources. As Mr. Hsu indicated earlier, the projected sound and lighting proposals are today's dollars, 2010 dollars. Obviously, we know in going forward with any capital project that there is a cost, there is the value of money and the cost of money over time. And so that might look different as well. So it is probably my opinion, after spending time listening to residents, neighbors, on the York Community Advisory Committee, sitting at ordinance hearings, I believe that we would be expected to make some changes, and not just changes to showing that we're going to enforce whatever new agreement is put in place. We are asking for a substantive increase utilization of that field. We have saved transportation dollars as a result of scheduling the use of that field at different times during the day and increasing the usage of that field. So while I can't put a hard figure on how many transportation dollars we have saved, I'm sure Mr. Rutter could, because we are scheduling practices in the morning. We're holding girls' soccer games on site. We're not getting a bus and going out to a park district property. So there has been some economy of savings that is, I can't give you an exact amount, but that we have experienced as a district by bringing more of our activities on site and using our 7.3, 7.4 usable athletic acres, optimizing that for all of the athletic opportunities, as well as the band opportunities that we provide our students. So, Mrs. Davey, I believe that there will most likely be something written in that ordinance that will either ask us to address it immediately or in a period of time, because the core issues are around both light and sound, and as Mr. Hsu said, depending on which group of individuals that you're talking to, one is a more compelling issue than the other. What we were taken aback by, I believe, was the sound issue, but it wasn't so much the loudness per se, but what was emanating from the public address system, and that had to do with the use of contemporary music before and during games and practices. That became much more of an issue. Also, the utilization of the public address system for band during the school day, as well as issues unrelated to the PA system the use of the metronome that had been utilized within recent years. So I do believe that we will be compelled to provide a solution. What you have on the agenda for you tonight is just giving authorization for us to put out a request for proposals. There's two levers to this as a Board of Education. You do. Going forward with the request for proposals does not commit you to ultimately making that expenditure. You make that decision at which point in time that we receive bids and we determine whether or not we have the resources available to do that. Now, we certainly have had a community and boosters and other athletic groups that have been very supportive. When those hard numbers are known, if it is possible to raise any public funds towards this project, that's another avenue to pursue. Maybe not covering the complete project, but maybe there is an opportunity. Maybe there is an opportunity to see if there is an opportunity for donations. I know the athletic boosters have committed money towards the turf project to be paid over 3 years. Will they be willing to continue those contributions for another 2 to 3 years as it relates to the cost of the lights? I don't know. We haven't had that conversation with them. Until such time we have a request for proposals approved and we have some actual dollars for people to have that conversation, it doesn't make sense to potentially engage in those conversations with those individuals until we know which direction we're headed in.
Ms. Hirsch.
I would like some additional background on maybe, Dr. Krizik, the rationalization for putting out a request for proposal to just one firm. I realized that Musco had installed our lights in 1986, but it appeared as though we were looking and only directing the request for proposal to Musco in the materials that we were provided.
I'll let Mr. Shu answer that. I will let him talking about sourcing out a specific item, but having multiple people being access to be the installers. Mr. Shu?
Yeah, to answer that, we wouldn't be putting out a request for proposal specifically to Musco Lighting or the even single-sourced Musco Lighting products. Musco Lighting was used, one, to evaluate the existing Musco Lighting system we have now, and to comment and give us information on what a retrofit looks like and what is plausible, what's achievable in a proposal, because that's not something that we could have determined on our own. This is something that they do for school districts and other groups all over the country because of their size. It's just part of their beginning to generate business. It's not something that they charge for or necessarily expect a guarantee of award of proposal for. With that said, a request for proposal will be written to meet the performance specifications that have shown to be possible. It wouldn't be written to single source someone per se. It's much the same way as when we wrote the specs, when our architects wrote the specs for the windows at Hawthorne, they used Winco model 4038 as the basis of design. So that was the basis of design for the project. That's what in their examples, the original drawings looked like that window. Within the spec book, they eventually identified 3 or 4 windows that would maybe meet the same requirements that was bid by multiple companies. It's in using this particular item for research and for source of design isn't the same as single sourcing the proposal.
My other question relates to the bigger picture. And I believe that the last time that we received a capital projects update, there were $2.2 million for the projects that we had hoped to be able to move forward to that we had put on hold. That included things, I think there were at least 2 roofs, there were lockers at the middle schools, there were chiller. I mean, we have a $10 million list of items that are capital project items that we have not been able to address. And we as a board, at the beginning of the summer, had decided that we were going to hold in reserve the limited capital funds that we did have in place in order to address emergency situations as they arose. So it's my recollection that we did make a specific, thoughtful decision to withhold on a number of capital projects last summer so that we could keep those monies in reserve in case of an emergency. Is that an accurate recollection?
I would think there's a number of identified capital projects, some pressing, some not as, that have been identified before the board multiple times. I would expect I would probably be asked by Dr. Krizik to update the 10-year plan for one of the winter meetings here with, a potential for looking for what work might be explored for next summer. In that time, you'd probably expect to see a couple things identified that weren't on the current plan. One of the things that you would see disappear was the more nebulous, just guess numbers that we had on building envelope issues, including tuck pointing that existed before. I just received this morning a 4-binder report from Structure Tech on what our tuck pointing needs and building needs look like across the district, and at various buildings, and what that might look like over the next 5 years. So that would be included in the update, along with other items that have arisen, things that we've foreseen, along with some of the greatest hits that you've seen in the past. So from that, we would present you with what our needs look like right now, what our immediate needs are, and what our needs look like on the horizon for each year over the 10 years, as we've always done in the past, with the acknowledgement that there's definite funding. As a piece of history, when the community passed the rate increase referendum a number of years ago, there was at the time great optimism that at this point we'd be running so far in the black that we could fund capital improvements at about $1.5 million a year without having to borrow. What a wonderful concept. We'd actually, for $1.5 million, get $1.5 million worth of work instead of minus the interest. Obviously, the economy changed drastically since then. The combination of a couple of years of very low CPI with no new growth has led to those surpluses they're non-existent. So going forward, any funding that we do for capital funds, I assume, is going to look more of the traditional borrowing as bonds expire and can be renewed, or if there happens to be any referenda in the future for whatever reasons that we might be addressing. So all those things loom over the list of work that you'll be receiving this winter, and these decisions are all difficult choices. So clearly you would receive an update on that list before the request for proposal for lighting would be brought back for a vote. So,
I have one other large-scale picture perspective to add to this, and that is that for the current school year that we're operating in, we as a board decided to make $2.8 million of cuts to our budget so that we could maintain our fiscal health as a district. And it is the recommendation of the administration that we will be making in the upcoming months $3 to $5 million additional cuts that are cuts that have been identified in key areas that the administration has offered that need to be evaluated. And unfortunately, many of those areas that are being targeted for cuts are educational areas where student learning, where we try to keep the cuts. You always say you try to keep the cuts away from the classroom, but the fact is that we're looking to make $3 to $5 million worth of cuts using the EPIRT process, which we have not received any data at this point, not expecting to. It's still in process. But as a board, we have asked 29 different administrators and leaders within the district to spend many, many hours working with teams of self-selected individuals who are invested in those programs to evaluate those programs, evaluate the outcomes, review the budgets, and make recommendations for potential cuts in those programs. And the disconnect that I'm having and the concern overall, we're in a financially very difficult, challenging environment. The monies from the state that we received in our cabinet update from Ms. Masterton still are over the $2 million mark, I believe, if I have that number correctly. And so while we did approve the levy this evening, or we're looking to approve the levy this evening, we also, for our state funding, are very concerned about the state coming through. So it sounds as though, Mr. Carlquist puts it in a very eloquent way that it's $11,000 a year over 10 years. It's not a lot of money. But when we look at the overall fiscal picture that the district is sitting in, I'm very challenged to move forward and spend any amount of money out of capital budgets to address a situation such as this. Now, it's a very unfortunate situation that we find ourselves in, but I am having a very difficult time considering, without having the EPIRT results back, without knowing what recommendations are going to be coming to the board, without having a contract in place for our teachers,
I'm very concerned at this point in time to be making any one-off decisions on expending any kind of dollars.
Ms. Hirsch, of the 29 EPIRD committees, one's a transportation committee, one affects operations and maintenance, and the other 27 affect the education fund. I really think we need to make it clear that any money for this project would not impact the education fund. And so I want to separate those 2 points out. So I can understand your uncomfortableness, but I don't imagine that the 3 to 5 millions is the majority of it is going to come out of O&M and or transportation, because those are the much smaller expenditures. Those are the smaller accounts within our overall budget, with education being the most important one. So I think for purposes of tonight, we cannot utilize money out of the education fund to buy roofs. And so we are not adversely affecting the education program by discussing either roofs or stadium lighting or sound, because all of that comes out of the operations and or the capital projects fund. And we cannot take money out of capital projects and put it into the education fund. So it isn't like we can take the $2.2 million in capital project funds or any money out of life safety and help put that into the education fund to offset any upcoming reductions. So I think because understanding and communicating the difference between those funds, I just really feel it's important for the community to know that what we're discussing this evening is not funds coming out of the education fund. It would be coming out of the capital project funds.
Perhaps some clarity in all of this in terms of the timeline and everything else. I would suggest that this may end up being a moot point. And the reason being is that we really don't know what will happen with the city and the ordinance. And even if we go out to bid, and under normal circumstances, when you go out to bid, you have a 60 to 90 day process where you can accept or reject the bid. So that can be held for quite a while. It will take a couple of months for us to get the bids in, to put together the bid specifications and get the bid in the first place. So not only will we have EPIRD done, we will hopefully. I think we'll all be really happy to have the contract done as well, the union and us both. Yeah. Yes, Nan. And so all of those things will be done, and we'll have a very good idea of how our total operational budget will be in effect at that point. Along with that, I don't think that any of us would even think of taking on this size of a project if we didn't know that whatever was going to come out of it, or however we were going to do this, it would be something that would allow us to be able to use the stadium in the way that we need to be able to use it. In other words, we're not just going to do this and then have an ordinance that doesn't provide us with any real update or change to what we have right now. That would be foolish. To waste money in that way. So what we're asking tonight is not necessarily to do anything but to get the figures and try to see some options. And then leave it up to you all to decide whether you want to follow through with the options that we present to you.
Mr. Kralquick.
Thank you, Ms. Masterton. You went right where I was going, which is, and as I foreshadowed earlier this evening, we spend more time now on $150,000 on lighting than we did on school improvement across 14 schools in the district, which is out of balance, especially when the request before the board tonight is simply putting out a request for proposals, getting the information. Let's get the facts. You went in a different direction, which is it may be moot. We'll have more information. At some point, this has to come back to the Board of Education. The board will vote yes or vote no. Whether it's $150,000 or it's grants and it's energy saving or it's $11,000 per year, that's real money. That's taxpayer money, and we have to weigh that as a board. But let's get the facts. I rather than spend any more time on one candle foot, of illumination. Let's get the information, and I'm not sure why we would not want to go out and exercise vendors and understand what the costs are, especially when there are unknowns, including requirements from the city, neighbors. Who knows if there could be lawsuits for light pollution and sound pollution. We've experienced things like that, within the community in the spirit of being good neighbors. Let's get the information.
Mr. Hsu, I have a couple clarifying questions. One, you had mentioned one potential unknown is we get the lights off the current poles and then there's problems. So what could that potentially cost us? The second is, what is the lifespan of the poles? Because we're looking to put lighting fixtures on the existing poles, and how long do we expect those to last?
We've had a passing look at the poles by our structural engineers who happened to be out there. They seemed to think that everything was in good order and there was no reason to think that those poles were anywhere near the end of their life expectancy. Upon the visit to see those poles, the lighting company itself thought that they were perfectly comfortable in using them for a project that they would warranty fully for 10 years. So that would be the bare minimum. As far as anything beyond that, if David, do you have any more information on the life expectancy of light poles?
I'm just going to clarify. I'm not really looking for costs. I'm just saying that that's one more potential cost to this. So I guess I have a couple comments. I did attend the hearing at York. I also had the opportunity to attend the most recent hearing that went till 11 o'clock at night, and we heard several things. A big thing that we heard that was a consistent theme was trust, that we are going to do what we're supposed to do, even should there be a new ordinance put in place. And they did talk about penalties because the trust level isn't there. We already know that since we started this process, we knowingly violated the ordinance twice already, and it was only by 40 minutes each time. But we did that knowing that we already had issues. We know that there was a third situation where we let somebody else use the field and told them what they were supposed to do, and after transition of a couple people, they didn't do what they were supposed to do either. So bigger than changing the lights is getting our house in order and making sure that we're following our obligations. I mean, Mr. Karlkus, I respect you're saying we're talking about $150,000. There was $150,000 things that we deferred from our capital projects plan. We tightened that up. We decided to only go with the most critical capital projects. So we deferred tuck pointing, saying it's not leaking into the schools yet. So in my mind, is this important? Do we need to be responsible? Is energy efficient lighting important? Yes. Do we want to be good neighbors? Yes. Is this the only option in the short term? I'm not sure that we've explored that. Should this jump ahead of any other needs, or should this be put in our capital projects list and we should be making responsible decisions about the few dollars that we have to spend, how we're going to spend this? I would fully support putting this on our list of things that we have to decide which one comes to the top. But I cannot support putting out a request for proposal when I don't believe there's any possibility that this is going to jump to the top of the list. To me, is being irresponsible to our vendors. We need to get our house in order, figure out how much money we're spending and what our priorities are. Is this really the most important thing on our list? So I think more powerful than putting the lights in is understanding, yes, it's something we have to do. We have to figure out when we can pay for it, how we can pay for it, but getting the rest of our house in order and making sure that we're living up to our commitments of when their lights are supposed to be turned off, they're turned off. We don't schedule games that we know are going to go and violate the ordinance, the existing ordinance that we already know that we're in violation of, and then we continue to act that way. And those are more, I heard many people come forth and say, you know what, I've seen improvement, but you're still breaking the rules. You're still breaking the rules. And that was a bigger issue than any of these other things. So, I mean, I'm not going to talk the polls. I mean, there are variations that could be more than 150. That was my only point in that. If we split up the lights and the sounds, could we look at fixing the sounds and putting the lights on a capital project list? I would be more supportive of that at this point. Do I think that this is something that we need to address as a district? Absolutely. But I think we need to look at all of our priorities and say, where do we spend our scarce resources? What are the most important things on that list? Mr. Collins.
Mrs. Ostachek, I echo what you say, and I'll be terse and just leave it at that. But there are two, as the community, I was at one of those same meetings, and when the community talked about trust, they talked about one time apparently we just forgot to turn out the lights till 2:30 in the morning. And Mr. Hsu, you bring up a good point that there are technological solutions to that. The ability to automatically turn the lights on and off from a remote location, which would be included in this proposal, and the ability to automatically schedule the lights. My question, as long as if we support the idea of going out to gather the facts, my question is there can we find out the facts of whether that equipment is able to be retrofitted into our existing system, which seems like it would establish some trust with the community.
I guess the short answer to that is clearly the control system would operate on, allowing the power to pass to the light fixtures or not, and could be done without the change in the light fixtures. It just becomes kind of an added benefit of the upgrade that gets included in the cost. But there certainly would be a dollar value associated with that separately.
And I'm just saying, let's gather those facts as well.
Okay. I know that there was a lot of time invested in this, and this also was a step that came out of the work that was done by the committee. And, again, my comments are not in any disrespect to any of the work done. I think there's value in all of this. I just think it has to be ranked in order that it belongs with the other priorities of the district. So thank you for coming and for your time this evening, and also for the 11 o'clock evening that you and Dr. Krizik and the advisory committee committed to at the most recent zoning meeting.
Thank you.
Our next item on our agenda is approval of board meeting minutes. So we have we have the October 26th and November 1st meeting minutes. Are there any board corrections or amendments to those? Okay, seeing none, they will be approved as presented. The next item is the superintendent's consent agenda. Are there any items any board members would like removed from the consent agenda? Ms. Hirsch? Item F. Any other items to be removed from the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none, I will accept a motion to approve the consent agenda moved by Mr. Absent item F, moved by Mr. Carlquist. Is there a second? Seconded by Mrs. Conroy. Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Carlquist?
Yes.
Ms. Conroy? Mrs. Ostachek?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mrs. Davy?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes. 7 ayes, no nays. That motion carries. May I have a motion for item F? Mrs. Droney?
I move that the Board of Education approve issuing a request for proposal for improved York High School stadium lighting and controls with the total project cost not to exceed $150,000.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mrs. Davy. Any board discussion? Mrs. Davy?
Based on what Mr. Collins just asked, within this recommendation with the total project cost, would we have the capability of having the breakout of what just the controls would be as a part of this total request for proposal? Could that be all a part of the proposal so that we would have more information as we move forward?
Mr. Collins?
As a point of clarification as well, can I presume that the sound system will be separate from the light system?
You don't need to bid the sound system. It'll be less than $10,000, so it doesn't fall under the required bidding components.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. I guess I'm going to make one comment. I am going to vote against this I realize that it is a request for proposal, but I don't think that we have the ability to follow through on this contract at this point. I think it should be put on the capital projects list, just reiterating my prior comments. Mr. Carlquist.
To be clear, my understanding, I want to make sure that this is the intent of the motion, at least the way you're interpreting it. There is no awarding of a contract at all. There is no commitment to expenditure of funds. This is simply a request for proposals with an itemization along the lines of what Mr. Collins has asked for and the interest that was expressed and what's in the backup material. Is that correct? Yes. Correct? Thank you.
Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Mrs. Davy?
Yes.
Mr. Colquist?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Ms. Conroy?
No.
Ms. Hirsch?
No.
Mrs. Ostojic?
No. That's 4 ayes, 3 noes. That motion carries. Our next item on our agenda is the superintendent's action items. Dr. Krizik.
The first is the adoption of the 2010 Certificate of Levy. This is in direct relationship to the presentation that Ms. Masterton had made earlier this evening.
Mrs. Duroni.
I move that the Board of Education approve the 2010 tax levy as presented.
Is there a second? Mrs. Davy, was that a second? Seconded by Mrs. Davy. All in favor? Do we have to do a vote? Okay. Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Mrs. Davy?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mr. Colquist?
Yes.
Mrs. Ostojic?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Ms. Conroy?
7 ayes, no nays. That motion carries. Our next item is the adoption of a new policy. Dr. Krizik, do you have any introduction to this?
As we've been going through the policy review, we've identified a policy that needs to be in place by January 1. Legislatively, it is required to be in place. So of all of the policies that we're currently working on, this is one that has a definitive time parameter, and it has implications for procedures to be put in place. Mrs. Hirsch, did you want to elaborate on that at all?
We took a look at this policy. The proposed policy is dealing with food allergies, which is a very serious situation, which I think has been handled very well in our schools from our nursing staff and our health staff. But I think it's something that we want to make sure all of the steps that need to be carried out are in policy and clearly communicated to all staff throughout the district to make sure that all of our students remain safe. The wording of the policy itself came from IASB. It is a new policy that has been written, and there were nothing challenging about the policy itself, so we felt we could just go ahead and move the IASB recommended policy forward.
Thank you. May I have a motion? Ms. Hirsch?
I move that the Board of Education adopt as a first reading the new policy of number 5405-11, Food Allergy Management Program, which, when adopted, will become effective at the time of its adoption and subsequently be added to the policy manual of the Board of Education, Chapter 5, Students.
Thank you. Sorry, moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mrs. Conroy. Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Ms. Conroy? Yes. Mrs. Ostojic?
Yes.
Mr. Collins is absent. Mr. Carlquist? Mrs. Davy?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes. Thank you. 6 ayes, no nays, 1 absent. That motion carries. The last item on the agenda is the approval of the superintendent search firm, and I will give an introduction to that. On November 1st, we conducted an interview for 3 search firms to assist us with the placement of a new superintendent upon the decision not to renew Dr. Krizik's contract. We had the opportunity to meet with the firms. They provided information. Subsequent to that, I went and did reference checks on the firms and was able to gather some additional information. All 3 firms are highly qualified firms. The 3 firms that were interviewed were Hazard Young Attia and Associates, BWP and Associates, and School Exec Connect. All three of the firms have experience in placing candidates at a wide variety of districts, including unit districts. All three have highly qualified principals and associates working with the firm, as well as those that were presented to be specific consultants on our work. All three demonstrated the ability to conduct a comprehensive search, including at a national level, should we desire this. In the reference checks, all three had favorable reference checks from the various districts I contacted. I was able to gain some recommendations on things that would be important for us to conduct our search. However, there was nothing that came back from any of the firms to say that they wouldn't be competent to conduct the search for us. I provided for you just a summary. There's nothing new in here as far as the estimated cost of the search. BWP has a base of $16,900. Their expenses have a little bit of a range. They could be from a low of $1,775 to a high of $6,350, depending on what we would want them to do. The higher range obviously would go with travel for a national search. Their advertising costs were between $1,825 and $6,500. And incremental, should we choose for them to do a background check, it's $50 to $300. And they would offer us a 12-month guarantee should there be any separation of the superintendent within that period. They would conduct, again, the search for free. Hazard Young Atia, base is $19,500. Expenses were max at $2,500. And their advertising costs were $2,000 to $3,500. Background check was included, and they had a 12-month guarantee. And the third firm, School Exec Connect, had a base cost of $17,500. Expenses capped at $2,300. Advertising from $1,000 to $4,000, again based upon how we'd want to advertise. And a background check is $250. School Exec Connect has a 24-month guarantee. We asked some additional questions that were presented by the board. One was if we wanted to tailor our search somewhat for our district, how flexible. All three firms replied that they would have some flexibility. However, they would advise us when they thought something we were asking for would not be in the best interest of our search. Mrs. Davy had asked, should we not be able to reach a consensus on a candidate, what would our additional costs be? And all three firms would help, should we get to that point, help us place an interim superintendent and then continue the search until we had placed a superintendent. And the cost would be minimal, possibly some expenses for that. All three firms, one additional question asked was how many other searches are the firms involved in? And consistently across the three firms, they were wrapping up the majority of their work. So they would all be able to focus on our job as a number one priority. So really what it comes down to is which firm we felt was the best match as far as personality-wise, who would be most comfortable with, who we felt we could have a relationship with. And based upon that, I'm going to recommend to the board that we hire School Exec Connect to help us with our search. There's a couple reasons why. They have done some extensive work for our district in the past. They have a lot of knowledge about our district. I have personal knowledge of the ability of this search firm and the individuals involved. And I will be spending a great deal of time working with them. So I believe that they will provide us excellent service. So based upon that, I would ask the board to support that recommendation. And with that, I'll take any questions, or I would ask for a motion. Let's start with the motion. Mrs. Davey.
Let me put the motion on the floor. I move to select School Exec Connect as the firm to conduct a search for new superintendent and authorize the president to develop and sign a letter of agreement with the firm consistent with School Exec Connect's proposal for services for Elmhurst School District 205, dated November 1st, 2010, and presented to the board on that date at a cost not to exceed $17,500 base cost and $2,300 for actual consultant expenses and $4,000 for actual advertising costs.
Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Hirsch. Any board discussion? I was calling on Mrs. Conroy.
While I was able to read the 3 individual proposals, I was unable to make it to the interview meeting, and for that reason, I'm going to be voting present, but with full confidence that my fellow board members can come to consensus on this.
Mr. Collins.
After having attended the interview session and reading their proposals, I have to say, just for the sake of discussion, that BWP stood out in my mind for a couple of reasons. They seem to have deeper resources than School Exec Connect, in my mind. They committed 4 people to the search instead of 2. We expressed to all 3 of these firms that we had a deep interest in recruiting someone that was highly knowledgeable and had extensive experience in professional learning communities. They provided us with a sitting superintendent to work on our search that is the superintendent of a district that is known for their work in professional learning communities and their complete adoption of the philosophy. To me, they were more responsive to our needs in the presentations and the proposals than any of the other 2 firms.
Thank you for expressing your concerns, Mr. Collins. And I guess my response to that would be, in going through the reference checks for the various firms, I was really looking more for not what are you saying, on the first day, but really how deep are you going to be able to go, and what's the background on the support. And I still believe from that information that School Exec Connect is probably the strongest candidate. And I also would state I'm not sure who the lead person on that project is. So I am leveraging off of my prior experience with the individuals from School Exec Connect and my knowledge of the level of support they'll bring. Mr. Collins.
At least my impression, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the lead person was Dr. Ann Noland. And actually, you've helped me remember another point that I would like to make, is that I'm always very interested in people that have skin in the game. And Dr. Noland said she's got 3 grandchildren at Jefferson School. To me, that's having some skin in the game.
Thank you again for expressing your concerns. And I will say I consider that. I believe that the individuals from School Exec Connect also have skin in the game, in that they provided prior service to our district and have expressed a deep commitment to ensuring success. So I appreciate your comments and what you've suggested. What I'm asking is, since I will be the point person spending a tremendous amount of time, is for this board to support me with the selection of the firm that I believe will provide us with the strongest level of support, both during the process and after the process. So is there any other board discussion? Okay, Mr. Carl Quick.
Just a couple things. First of all, in terms of first of all, I've expressed previously my disapproval for the direction the board is heading and replacing the superintendent. I've given some reasons for that in the past, including the timing, the fact that we have a number of rather significant things in front of us that need to be addressed, where continuity, I think, would be a factor, including things that affect costs. I want to circle back to costs and a theme that came up earlier this evening, including having a satisfactory settlement to the teacher negotiations and being able to close what's projected to be millions of dollars of gap in our budget. So specifically as it relates to the motion, this motion says not to exceed $17,500 base cost, $2,300 for consultant expense, and $4,000 for actual advertising costs. Is that do we believe that will cover all costs associated with the search?
The response to that is yes. And that was a consistent response that I received from the firms, that these that the firms were very accurate in quoting their costs. So School Exec Connect has guaranteed us a cost of $17,500 for the base. The consultant expenses are not to exceed $2,300, so they could be less than that. And the advertising costs are $4,000. The additional cost, should we choose to do it later, would be if we want to do a background check, which is a nominal amount. I believe it was $250 for this firm.
And what about travel expenses? If the board has talked about a national search, if we were to bring candidates in from across the country, my assumption is that would be a board expense. Is that travel expense included in this?
The School Exec Connect did not have any additional cost for candidate travel. The board, however, should we travel somewhere, we would have additional cost for that. Those would be an unknown.
So we would not be paying for candidates' travel expense to come in to interview?
No.
Okay. So only projected additional expense would be board expense to do site visits and reviews after. And do you have an estimate as to what that cost would be?
I do not have an estimate for that cost.
Okay. Secondly, in support of engaging a search firm, one of the things a search firm, I believe, can do and has done in the past is help coalesce and lead and guide, not just manage the process, but guide a board through the process. Again, as what I heard referenced during public comment earlier this evening was concerns, at least by a few citizens, about this board's ability to articulate its reasons for making a change. Now, this doesn't change the direction that the board's chosen to go, but it does have a rather significant impact on the board's ability to attract a new superintendent and needs to be much crisper and clearer and more complete in its expectations, in what attributes, or I think the language in the press release was leadership style, the board expects. Or else it is very difficult to recruit for any kind of a position if a hiring organization can't be more articulate and crisp in terms of the criteria of what it's looking for. That is, I think, in support. Third, I'm wondering if the board should be given some consideration. I want to circle back to this notion of expense. I was glad to hear my colleagues raise a great deal of concern about expenditures, because I do think that is something we need to be keenly sensitive to. And I've raised in the past my concern about just the search in total, because there's expense now associated with the search of the $17,500 plus the $2,300 plus the $4,000 plus the other board expense travel potentially. Not to mention the fact that we don't know, and it's very possible that we could end up having to pay significantly more in salary expense and benefits under a contract in order to engage a new superintendent than what we would or could be under contractually, certainly of what we're contractually paying today. But I also think it's instructive to look at what's gone on of late in the state of Illinois. In the last couple of years, there were 112 superintendent changes that took place. This was in 2010. It was about the same number in 2009. Of those 112 searches, 38 of those searches were conducted by the Illinois Association of School Boards. 15 were split up amongst 4 private firms, and 72 were conducted independently by local school districts without professional assistance. I have not heard any discussion by this board about 2 of those pieces that the vast majority of school districts across Illinois, 87 of the 112, have chosen paths that they've chosen to follow. I've not heard any discussion as to whether or not we would have the means, or we could, at a much lower cost, be able to manage the hiring of a superintendent as a leadership team. That's one. And 2, why of those that have chosen to use the services of a search firm, 66%, or roughly 2/3, have used the IASB. Now, the IASB is the Illinois Association of School Boards, is an organization that we pay dues to. So the staff salary expense is already covered as a part of our dues. So we're paying for that part of it already. And they offer the service, and according to their published information, they would do a search for what is about 20% the cost of what one of these search firms would offer. And then there's an a la carte of supplemental services that could be engaged. I also was very impressed to learn that one of the two individuals through the IASB that has responsibility for our district, our community, this area, is the immediate past chair of the National Association of Superintendent Search Association, and has a rather vast network of resources and constituents and contacts and candidates and the like nationally. Now, I don't know whether or not that is the right way to go or not, but I'm concerned that there hasn't been discussion by this board on two alternatives that the vast majority of school districts across Illinois consider or have followed, especially when as we have such a concern about finances that we are quick to go the route of what 15 have gone, the private search firm route. Now, I know many members of this board are attending the Illinois Association of School Board Convention this weekend, and one of the programs that again, your tuition is paying for on Saturday morning is the IASB presenting their search firm services. So I put out there for consideration by the board, again, because of the expense and doing the responsible due diligence, is this not something that we should be considering and have on the balance for evaluation?
Ms. Hirsch.
Mr. Kralkwist, I do have some thoughts on this topic, and I think I had raised some of them earlier, and maybe you didn't catch them all. And there were 112 replacements last year. But the interesting thing about the state of Illinois is that there are, and I know I'm not going to get the number right, but there's over 850 school districts that are in the state of Illinois, the largest, I believe, in any other state of the union. And a big reason for that is because there are many, many districts in the state of Illinois which are single school districts. Today, I spent the day as part of the professional development process at Stevenson High School. Stevenson High School is a very high-achieving high school, which happens to be a single school district, which what that means is they have an elected board of 7 board members who provide guidance and direction to the superintendent that they've hired, which oversees the principal of that one school building. Now, there's 4,500 students there. It's a very sophisticated school. They have some phenomenal programs. They're very high performing in PLCs, and they have a great, great history. One of the other interesting facts about that particular school is that they promote from within. When you look at their list of the number of superintendents and the number of principals that they have within their organization, which the building was opened in 1964, it is less than 10. There's probably 7 principals and maybe 7 superintendents. So the characteristics of our district are unique in that we are a unit district. That makes it more complex. Today, I spent the day trying to learn about professional learning communities, and they were struggling and working to perfect that within one school building, but we have 13 school buildings. We have a $115 million operating budget. We have some complex organizational things that go on within 205, and we have a lot of initiatives that we want to see move forward. So I understand the concern about the expense, but when I balance the cost of the search for the leader of this $110 million business, I think that the cost that has been presented is within an acceptable range in terms of the most important decision that this Board of Education can ever make is its selection of the superintendent who is going to lead the administrative team and the entire district moving forward. So while I appreciate, I'm the one that was, expressing concerns about, where we are budget-wise and where we're spending money. But in this particular instance, I'm going to say that of those 87 that chose not to use a
search firm, I'm going to guess that a very good high percentage of them are single school districts, which are not as complex as ours. And I'm going to say that for those that, and there's probably a good number of those that promoted from within, which is something that I would like to see our district really work to improve our ability to promote staff from within the organization and move them up and work on professional development and increase their skills and do cross-training. I don't think that we're at a point right now that we can do that, but I think that that's something that we should definitely be aspiring to, and maybe within 5 years we're going to be in a position where it might be time for the next superintendent to be looking for their next challenge, and we will be able to promote from within and not incur these expenses. So there's a lot of thought that I believe that each of the board members, as we weigh any expenditure that we're making, have made maybe personally and maybe haven't been shared at the board table. I thought I had shared some of those thoughts, but maybe this was the appropriate time to do that.
Yeah, I'm going to, I guess, add some additional points to that. The IASB is serving all the school districts in Illinois, and they do a great job of helping to screen candidates, collecting candidate input names. They are not recruiting superintendents out of school districts to the same degree these private firms are. So the strength, and this was again something I heard consistently from every firm that every school district that I talked to, was the biggest power that we're going to get from a recruiting firm is their ability to go and attract candidates, to solicit candidates to come into the search process because of the complexity of our district, the size of our district, our types of needs. That is going to be really critical in the success of this search. So that is, I think, one additional point that I would add to that discussion. Mrs. Davey?
This is a side issue. I think I'm hoping we'll cover it another time, but it was something I asked. You would ask us if we had additional questions, and I had emailed you, and I think you followed through. Do any or all three of the firms provide services to help with assistant superintendent or principal searches? Since, we have that to consider as well. Could you, give us that information?
I have received that information, and should we as a district choose to do that, however, what we did several weeks ago was we all voted unanimously on the goals for the superintendent, and that was one of the priorities for Dr. Krizik to come up with a plan. So should we get to a point where we feel that we're not able to move forward on the plan with the superintendent, that would be an appropriate thing for us to talk about and consider. But the motion on the table right now relates to placement for the superintendent.
But I asked for do they do it and what their cost would be? Just as we make our decision tonight, where were they all?
So you're connecting.
I think there's a potential connection, and I agree that
there isn't one, because as a board, that isn't something that we have talked about moving forward with. This motion is about a search firm for the superintendent. We approved as a board that Dr. Krizik would put together the plan for placement of those positions. Unless we're saying that we're undermining the confidence in her ability to do that, that isn't really part of this discussion. Mrs. Conroy.
First, I'd like to say that I can't agree more with Mrs. Hirsch in terms of us going forwards and promoting from within. We have some great talent within our district, and I think we're doing ourselves a disservice morale-wise by not looking at those resources. But my question would be to the senior board members, in that with all the experience you've had in hiring search firms or hiring superintendents, have you ever chosen to use IASB, and if not, why?
Mrs. Duroni.
Since I have been on the board, we have not used IASB, but I will have to say that the several search firms that we did work with pretty much provided the same types of things, and I would certainly think it would be worth our while to consider the IASB as a cost-effective way to complete the search. I think Mr. Kralquist's suggestion of talking with them on Saturday morning is a great idea. I also wanted to speak to this principal and administrative vacancy question I was going to ask during board communications, that we put that on the agenda. for a future board meeting due to the lateness of the hour. I would like to talk about that whole process. I read the goals a little differently, the goals that we approved a little bit differently than you did, so I think we need to talk about that, if that's the pleasure of the board, to talk about the process that we're going to use to replace administrators and principals.
We will put that as a future agenda item. Mr. Carlquist.
Two additional points. One is I heard the point raised, and I too would be concerned but yet I've not heard anything that has precluded this from being an option, and that is internal candidates to be able to apply for this position. I mean, if my assumption, my expectation would be is that there are internal candidates, that whatever search firm the board elects to go with, that internal candidates would be considered. That's one. If it's not, then I'd like to understand that. Secondly, Mrs. Ostacek, you referenced one of the compelling reasons to go with one of the premium search firms was their expressed ability or objective of recruiting candidates proactively from another district. If the board proceeds with again, engaging or retaining one of these premium price search firms versus like the 72 that conducted searches by independently as a local school district, I would ask that as a Board of Education we respect that, and if there are candidates that we know of or if there is that proactive recruiting, that it goes to those search firms. I've been informed that there are already members of this Board of Education that are contacting other superintendents and trying to identify prospective candidates, arguably recruiting. And I think if the board is insistent upon spending the money for a premium priced search firm, certainly should be willing to give that search firm names or candidates that they might be aware of. But to embark on independent recruiting endeavors, I think is out of bounds.
Mr. Carlquist, upon selection of a firm, one of the first things we'll do is set the ground rules of answering a variety of your questions. What are the parameters from the board? As a board, we'll decide, would we consider internal candidates? Would we not? And that is a choice. And it's obviously a choice as a board that we could choose to support or not support, how candidates would be referred. So that would all be part of the process that we would delineate as a group. First process is to hire the search firm. And then
so you think until we hire a search firm, it's okay for board members to be following that practice?
I'm not sure what practice you're referring to.
What I described, reaching out and contacting other superintendents or recruiting superintendent candidates.
What I would say is the motion on the table is about a search firm, not about how we're going to approach the search. So let's take care of the motion, and we will follow up with the practice of how the board should engage with the search firm once the search firm is hired. That's my response. Mrs. Davey.
I am the maker of the motion, and I will obviously be supporting the motion. And the reason I will be supporting the motion, after listening to everything, there are many valid points about expenditure of dollars and being careful with what we choose to embark. But I think that our board needs someone that knows what they're doing to help us. They need to help us together to keep our district moving forward. I think we're kind of at a bad place right now on our board. I don't think anyone will disagree with that. And I think that the members of School Exec Connect know our district, are invested in our district, care about our district deeply, and if we have to, if we recognize that we need someone professionally to help us, not only identify the right candidate, but identify what our common direction is. I think we need some basic help in identifying that, articulating it perhaps. Maybe it's identified and just not articulated. But I think School Exec Connect knows us and will be able to give us the best shot at doing that right now. And I just feel like as a board, that's what we're all up here to do, is to keep our district moving forward in the best way that we know how. And it's a difficult time, and it's difficult for me to do this, but I really I think that as a district is what we need to do.
Mr. Collins.
Mrs. Ostachek, in the spirit of exactly what Mrs. Davies said, cohesiveness, common direction, your enthusiastic support of School Exec Connect, I'll support the motion.
Any other board discussion? Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davy?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mrs. Ostachek?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
No.
Ms. Conroy? Mr. Kalquist?
No.
Thank you. So if I do my math, I have 4 ayes, 2 nays, 1 present. That motion carries. Our next item on our agenda is just a highlight of upcoming meetings. Tuesday, December 14th, we have our Board of Education business meeting, 7:30 here. And then following that, Tuesday, January 11th, we have our Board of Education workshop meeting, 7:30, also here at the District 205 Center. We have action coming out of closed session. May I have a motion, please? Mrs. Davy?
I move that the Board of Education accept the resignation agreement between the Board of Ed of Elmhurst School District 205 and the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources.
Thank you. Is there a second? Seconded by Mrs. Conroy. Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Davy?
Yes.
Ms. Conroy?
Yes.
Mrs. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Ostachek?
Yes.
Mr. Kalquist?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
7 ayes, no nays. That motion carries. We have one additional motion. Mrs. Davy?
I move that the Board of Education authorize payment to Retzi Hall in the amount of $2,615.91 for additional hours worked.
Thank you. Is there a second? Seconded by Mrs. Hirsch. Ms. Hirsch, any board discussion? Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davy?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Mr. Kalquist?
Yes.
Mrs. Ostachek?
Yes.
Ms. Conroy?
Thank you. 7 ayes, no nays. The motion carries. Our next item on our agenda is board communications. Are there any board communications? Mrs. Deroni, I already have your note on a future agenda item. Mrs. Davy, did you have something?
I just wanted to give a LEND update from this past month's meeting, which was right after the October business meeting. So it's been 3 weeks since I was there, but it's, I think, relevant. The LEND and a couple other of the institutions, including the large unit school district and a couple of the special ed co-ops, are considering joining together in a joint lawsuit against the State Board of Ed, which sounds pretty dramatic, but the reason for it is that they feel, and they are getting direction from legal counsel, that the State Board of Ed has overstepped its bounds in some of its ELL requirements for school districts. Some of its number of coordinators and administrators, and some of the formulas that we have honored and have taken as law, and so we have done what we have needed to do, and that's had a budget impact on our district specifically. So they're working towards nudging the State Board of Ed that there is a large enough group that is considering pursuing legal action. I just want everyone to know that that's on the horizon. If it moves forward, the question was asked what would be the cost implication for each district, and it would probably be some formula that similar to what our actual fee is to join LEND, but for us it would probably be in the magnitude of $2,000. So, spread among many school districts, we aren't talking about a substantial amount of money, but the impact of what this, just knowing that there might be a lawsuit, could have a budget impact in our favor, and I will let everyone know as this moves forward. But it was an early discussion, but it's a real hot button with school districts.
Thank you, Mrs. Davy. That's a great update. Do you have any sense of the timeline? Is this years or months or?
They've put a task force together, and I would say early January, February, and they've already got, they're already coalescing other groups to join with us and have legal counsel involved already with preliminary advice. So I think we will know, early next year the direction.
Thank you. Any other board communications? Mrs. Deroni?
I just wanted to say that the night that we announced our decision not to renew the superintendent's contract, the board and the community heard a lot, at least some, from members of the board who were in opposition to that decision. And we heard tonight at our public comments, I heard at the PTA forum night that this caused a lot of head scratching and uncertainty, and I'm just hoping that at some point in the community, in the future, the community will have the opportunity to hear why the majority of the board felt the way they did. I don't know whether that should be a board communication topic sometime or an agenda item, but I'm thinking there's a need for that.
Thank you. Mr. Carlquist.
I'd like to acknowledge the PTA Council for the work that they did in facilitating and organizing the Community Board of Education Forum that was held on November 1st at the high school, and thank those members of the public that participated in that session, because I do think as a Board of Education we get great value from that feedback and points of view, and even in the discussion that takes place in those small group sessions amongst the various community members that are there. It's clear that there isn't always agreement on a particular issue, but it is helpful to identify where there are flashpoints, where there are areas of concern. My question for you, Mrs. Osijek, or Dr. Krizik, would be what how best how are you looking to the board to capture the concerns and the issues? Just take things in stride. I want to make sure that the members who invested the time to give that feedback, that they understand, first of all, that we heard them. That's, I think, in part the reason for the acknowledgement, and two, that there's going to be some follow through or an understanding of when some of those big issues will be addressed. Clearly, the teacher's contract was a flashpoint for many, and I think that's pretty clear in terms of there's groups that are working on it. There's a high level of timeline and so forth. There was clearly the concern that was raised by the request for an agenda item about, with a lame duck superintendent, no disrespect intended, and with significant openings like principalships that are open or cabinet members that are open. How does the Board of Education intend on filling those positions? When? What process? Who's going to make that decision? What are the ramifications of doing that in a transition period and so forth? A third area that I heard raised of concern was very specific to club fees, and this is going to be increasingly a flashpoint as we talk about trying to strike a balance, get to a balanced budget, find the right balance between cost reductions and revenue generation, but something that maybe to some seems minuscule was clearly an open nerve with many of the community members that were there, and I think we need to make sure that we address it or at least call out when we intend on having that addressed, so that folks know that, again, we heard them and that there's a point in time that that'll be addressed. And I think there are probably many. What I heard was largely biased by what the theme that Mrs. Osijek and I were representing, and I'm sure policy and the other groups probably heard some very different things, and I'd be interested in hearing from those board members as well.
First, I'm going to ask Dr. Krizik. I know that we had cabinet members as well as board members in each of the sessions. I don't know that there were any additional follow-up items where community members were looking for additional feedback. Are we able to take any of the frequently asked questions and put that information in an accessible form for community members, so that those that didn't get to participate maybe have some of the insight? And are there any action items coming from that event?
Well, most of us took notes, and tonight we're not going to speak to each of the coalescence of each of those three different pieces. To Mr. Carlquist's point, there is an extracurricular EPERT committee, and they will certainly look at their current budget, which includes a revenue enhancement. Any change to that would be adding a 10% increase to their budget expenditures by removing those fees. So whether that comes out of that EPERT committee, we'll see then. Again, although we have the EPERT committee in place, nothing does preclude the board from, reversing any prior decisions, should that be the will of the board. Are there any immediate recommendations to come out of what we heard at the forum? Nothing immediate. Many things touched on some of the work that we're already doing. Some of the things touched on issues related to communication and putting things in places where they're more accessible and understandable to parents, i.e. course sequences of things and so on and so forth. So as those things emerge, I don't know. We will debrief again as a cabinet. We briefly debriefed on that. But if there is something emerging and there is a forum to use either a Talk 205 or something, and just to try to put information in context, I think sometimes taking a question out of context and not putting it in part of a larger picture doesn't necessarily always make sense for our community.
Ms. Hirsch.
I just want to make a comment to my fellow board members. This has been a very trying time for the last number of months, and we did a lot of deliberation and a lot of soul searching and a lot of work in terms of trying to decide how to move the district forward. And I think throughout that process, which was obviously a confidential process because it's evaluation of personnel, the deliberations and discussions that happened during that process should be private and remain private. And we did spend a significant amount of time deliberating this. The comment that I want to make to my fellow board members is that it was my understanding that we had agreed to the board norms that indicated that the board speaks with one voice. And while I appreciate in a forum like the PTA Council Forum, it might be difficult to answer questions exactly identically, we have all agreed that the president of the board is the person who is going to be the spokesperson for the board. And I would like to see my fellow board members strive a little harder to honor that board norm. It was the will of the board that we decided not to renew the superintendent's contract. But the details of that are details that are to remain private because that is personnel review and that is confidential. And I would really like to see the board take a step moving forward. As Mrs. Davies said, she thinks that we might be a little confused. I don't know that we're confused. We might just be in simply disagreement. And that is why we are an elected board of 7. But it is now time for the 7 of us to come together for the best interest of our district and of our children to move the district forward.
Mrs. Conroy.
I completely agree with Mrs. Hirsch, and having been on the board for a little over 3 years and learned much from the senior members of this board, I'm also very, very disappointed in that they came forward in their minority and spoke out. I've been in the minority many times, and no matter how much I believed I was correct, I respected the fact that we spoke with one voice. I respect Dr. Krizik very much, and I think that what was discussed in closed session about her employment is confidential. And I would like to see us, the 7 of us, work together and put what's in the best interest of our students first going forwards.
Okay. Mrs. Durrani.
I just don't want board members to misunderstand that I in any way want to disclose the contents of our closed session and our evaluation of the superintendent. What I absolutely agree that the board speaks with one voice, but the board gets to speak. Speaking with one voice doesn't mean you have to agree, and I think the community deserves to know the direction in which we as a board want to go. I don't even know that based on our discussions of whether or not to renew the superintendent. Of course, the evaluation does not become public. It is absolutely private. What is not private is where we want to go as a board, what we are looking for, what we value. And that's all I'm looking for from the board majority who felt that we were going in the wrong direction or whatever they felt. I mean, I'm just hearing contradictions as our community members. I just think a healthy discussion of what our board goals are and what we want to see the district do and where we want to see the district go would be a good thing.
Thank you, Mrs. Deroni. And that is one of the critical services that the search firms will provide with us. They will help us navigate through that and come to a consensus on those very points. So the action we took tonight is the first step in getting that done. Mr. Carlquist.
I too feel compelled to at least share my perspective of the board speaks with one voice. The board speaks with one voice is a function of what the will of the board is, and that's the decision, and that the entirety of the board abides by and supports what the decision of the majority of the board is. On this particular issue, the majority of the board spoke, and we're moving in a new direction as far as the superintendent. I also agree with Mrs. Deroni that says speaking with one voice does not mean that we are not allowed to express our point of view and to perhaps disagree with what fellow board members might think or feel, and that's the way the process works. And I think the community would be very disappointed if we didn't engage that way. When I spoke earlier about expressing what I felt was the importance of the board to be able to articulate criteria and what it meant by leadership style and so forth, was with eyes focused on the horizon, looking forward, and the implications that that has on who our next superintendent would be, what characteristics that individual would possess, what leadership style that individual would have, what the will of this board was or the voice of this board was in terms of requirements and expectations. So let's make no mistake about what our responsibilities as board members are and what the norm of the board is in terms of now unifying. I think Mrs. Davey is bang on. Unifying and moving forward and making the right, best next decision for this district.
Thank you, Mr. Carlquist. You made some excellent points, and I would have one disagreement with you. It is our obligation to express our voices, but once the vote is taken, once the decision is made, we don't continue to argue the points, that we should be moving forward in executing the path that we've chosen. Mr. Carlquist.
I agree with you, and I have not seen from any of my colleagues any argument. So if that's I would object if that's your insinuation, point one. Point two, there has not been a vote, I don't believe, on the action. Was there a formal action, or was there? My understanding. Excuse me. I have the floor. Excuse me. I don't believe there was a formal action. So under Robert's rules, there would not have been a motion and debate and an opportunity to cast a vote in that way. There was a statement that was read by the board chair in terms of a resolution not to renew. But there was no board action. The only board action that has officially taken place in a public meeting, in a forum where there's a motion and a vote, has been to retain a search firm. So I also want to be very clear that there has not been a formal action in that regard.
Thank you. You are absolutely correct. The action was not to take action. However, the three board members who did not agree with that have made their public statements without a debate. So I would just suggest that we move forward in the best interest of this district. So with that, I will accept a motion to adjourn. Moved by Mrs. Conroy, seconded by Ms. Hirsch. All in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.